Everyone to a special meeting of the planning board in ZRAC. So as we usually do, we're going to have to get everyone to all the planning board members to say they're present. So first off, I want to let everyone. Oh, Taylor, would you please poke the record button?
Yep.
Recording in progress.
Thank you. So welcome everyone. We are being recorded both via Zoom and via WinCam. Thank you very much, WinCam. If you do not wish to appear on the recording, please turn off your video and mute your microphone. So why don't I do a quick roll call vote for the planning board, make this official. Carrie Layton.
Present.
I Ching Scott.
Present.
Nick Rosettos.
Present.
Sally isn't here. I'm the Obsurius. I'm present as well. We also have with us this evening our recording secretary, Nancy Polcari, town planner, Taylor Herlin, and a lot of people from our ZRAC. Welcome you all this evening. And we have Emily Innes from Innes Associates, who will be leading the discussion this evening of MBTA 3A. So I did an intro last time we met. I don't think I need to do it again. We have another person coming in. I want to note we just have a strange thing going on. We did have a public hearing that was scheduled for 8:15 this evening. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take a very short break from this meeting. We're going to continue that public hearing until I believe we're continuing it until 8:45, and then we'll jump right back into this. It was just a scheduling issue. So we will be going, we have about an hour and a half this evening to discuss for Emily to do a presentation of 3A. So why don't I turn it over to Emily? You have host privileges, correct? You have share privileges. Okay.
I do, and thank you very much. And with your permission, I'm going to switch screens and share my screen.
Okay.
So let me just pull that up. And you should be all able to see the screen now, that opening slide. So first of all, good evening. It's a pleasure to be back with ZRAC again. You heard from Michael Wang of Foreman Place last time about the North Main Street corridor. Tonight is an introduction to the MBTA Communities Act. I'll touch a little bit at the end on the technical work that J.M. Goldson did for the town at the beginning of the year or the beginning of the summer. But mostly this is going to be what the MBTA Communities Act is about, how the compliance model works at a very high level, the different components that we need to think about. So with that, let me just jump into the overview. Now, before I start, you'll see a logo from RKG Associates. They are not a consultant for this project, but Eric Halverson from RKG Associates and I have worked very closely on this introduction to the MBTA Communities Act. So I wanted to acknowledge their contributions in this. And so when you see a section that has their logo and my logo together, just know that we worked together on this data. So let's start with what the MBTA Communities Act is. It is a law that requires that 177 of the MBTA communities provide for a zoning district for multifamily housing. And that is a district of reasonable size, cannot be age restricted, has to be suitable for families and children, must have a minimum gross density of 15 dwelling units per acre, and part of the district must be has a geographic location or geographic requirement from a transit station, so commuter rail, subway, etc. The purpose was fairly clear. Massachusetts has a huge housing shortage, and that is a problem in terms of the cost of housing, that it is not financially attainable for most households. It is a huge economic disadvantage to the Commonwealth. It is a competitive disadvantage with other states means that employers are looking for employees that don't have housing or don't have housing that they can afford. And then placing housing near transit, dear to a planner's heart, placing housing near transit is good planning. It's good housing policy, good economic policy, good transportation policy. But primarily, it's because we as a state have a housing shortage. And that housing shortage isn't just limited to the MBTA communities, but certainly those are the communities that are in the area of graded shortage. It's also important to understand what the act isn't. It's not a mandate to build housing. The communities, the municipalities are required to zone for it. The towns and cities are not required to build it. The assumption is that will be the private market acting under zoning. It's also not a production target. It is not saying that this is the number that you must meet in terms of the units that you produce. We're talking about zoning as a determinant of housing capacity, and we'll talk more about that in this presentation. It's not just affordable housing. We've heard that from a lot of people that the MBTA Communities Act is all about affordability, and it's not. It is market rate with the opportunity to have some affordable housing. We'll talk a little bit more about that. It's also not the only tool that communities can use to address a variety of housing needs. I haven't run into a single community that has one type of housing need yet. And it's also not viewed as optional. And we'll talk about that as a little bit in a little bit. So who's required to comply? You are, obviously. Winchester is one of the communities, but you can see this map here of the 177. And this is how these communities were defined. And of course, you can have this presentation afterwards, so I won't spend a lot of time on that. You're a commuter rail community, obviously, and have until 2024 to comply. There are other communities that have different levels of compliance based on the type of community they are. The tightest deadline is for the rapid transit communities, which is this December. For the commuter rail and the adjacent communities, that extra year gives them a little bit more flexibility in their planning. So there's a couple of different implications if the town doesn't comply. Although it's second rather than first on this slide, I really think of this loss of the opportunity to address housing needs, to support economic development. That's really critically important, I think, for most towns. Many towns have done some planning on their housing needs. They have an idea of what's important to them. And this conversation around complying with the MBTA Communities Act allows towns to really think about those needs and talk about it as part of their community conversation. From the stick point of view, I think that ability to address the opportunities is really the carrot. The stick point of view, and there is one, is there's a loss of access to grant funds. So there were 3 identified in Section 3A in the legislation. And then fairly recently, EOHLC, the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, identified 13 more grants that are to which access is denied if a community is not in compliance. And then finally, in March of this year, the Attorney General gave an advisory guidance that all MBTA communities must comply with this law. So the AG is identifying this as not an option. So I mentioned that MBTA Communities Act is not the only tool. This conversation that RKG and Ennis Associates had about the other tools, and Eric prepared this slide. So you see there are communities that have issues with housing the unsheltered, issues with housing extremely low or low income, moderate income or workforce, and market rate. The MBTA Communities Act is a tool for the latter two, for the market income, workforce, and the market rate housing. It's not really a tool for the others. And this is a sort of summary of tools that can address others. So I want you to see this in the perspective of all the things that a community can do to address its housing needs, and that the MBTA Communities Act is just one of those tools. It's also not housing production, and zoning itself is not housing production. And some of you, I'm sure, are very familiar with zoning. But for those of you who aren't, or those of you who may be watching this on replay, we'll talk a little bit more about zoning later. But think of zoning as a possibility of what can be. When you talk about housing production, you'll run into a number of other factors. So zoning allows housing, but what determines whether or not it can be built really depends on those factors that feed into the private market. Interest rates are certainly one of those. Whether or not there are sites in the community that can be developed, how strong the market is in the community for the type of housing that's allowed and can be produced, whether or not people are willing to sell their land for housing. Critical one in Massachusetts, excuse me, especially given what I just said about housing affordability, is do you have enough labor to build the housing? And also the desirability of the community. There's the whether or not a community is a livable community, it's an attractive community. That's one side of it. Another side of it is how well has the community set up their permitting requirements, the permitting process to attract the type of housing that that community wants to have. So just because an area is zoned for housing doesn't mean the housing will actually happen. Taking these factors into consideration is a really important part of the overall planning process. So let's talk a little bit about the compliance requirements. So we're going to go through, as I said, the high level of the compliance model. And the compliance model is a combination of GIS, Geographic Information Systems, mapping, and an Excel spreadsheet. And we're going to go through each of those components. And so there is a process which you see on the screen for compliance. It is also the process for the iterative testing needed to understand whether you're compliant, and if not, how do you become compliant? There's a process of downloading information that the state has created, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Putting that GIS information together with the Excel model, and then testing scenarios. And so the scenarios can be a community's current zoning requirements. By that, I mean their dimensional standards, their allowed uses, or it can be, we'd like to test something different. So for example, say a community tested a building height of 2 stories in an area. They could use the model to say, hey, you know what? 2 stories didn't work for us in this geographic area. What happens if we try 3? What happens if we try 5? What happens if we modify the lot size? So the model allows you to do that iterative testing and understand from the components that the model tests whether or not your zoning would be compliant. Now, there's other factors that go into that, which we'll discuss as we go along, but the model tests particular components. And in particular, there are 3 compliance tests: land area and capacity. So land area includes location, size, adjacency to transit, and excluded land. Capacity is about the unit count, the number of dwelling units. The density, which is the dwelling units per acre, and how close you are to transit. And then zoning puts all of that together into a framework that permits the use to happen. But it also looks at things like the dimensions, the lot size, dimensions being height, setbacks, et cetera, how much parking is required, how much open space is required, and any restrictions on density that you may have. And these 3 things work together. So if you are testing a zoning district and you find that it's out of compliance, you can play with any one of these factors. You can test any one of these factors to see if that brings it in. So for example, if you're a community that likes a particular dimensional standard, you're still not in compliance, do you need to try and change the land area, the geography of the district? If you find that you like the geography, maybe you need to play a little bit around with the capacity or with the zoning to get to that capacity. So we're going to go through each test in turn. So the first of all is, let's talk about your land area requirements. You are required to have a minimum land area of 37 acres. You have a developable station area of 446 acres. That's basically your half-mile radius. And you have to locate 50% of your total district within the station area. And that is, by the way, 50% of the total district once it's determined. So let's just say instead of 37 acres, you decided you wanted a district of 50 acres. 25 of those acres need to be in the station area. So as we go through this process, just know that in the background, I'm going to be doing some additional math and tests to make sure that you're compliant. That's also true of the minimum contiguous district size. Technically, it's 50%. But again, so 18.5 acres is 50% of 37 acres. But just know that if you have, again, a district of 50 acres or 100 acres, and there might be some good reasons why you would want a larger district, then your minimum contiguous district size is half of that. So we have some test questions. So where is the district? Where is it relative to the station area? Obviously, for an adjacent community, that's not as important because they don't have a station area in there. Do you have 37 acres across the districts that you're testing? Is at least one of them 18.5? You can't have a district of smaller than 5 acres. So that's something else. Some communities are using multiple districts. If you do that, just know that they all have to be above 5 acres. And then contiguity means, is the acre, it's a district, all one piece. And so is that 18.5, or do you have smaller non-contiguous districts that are less than that? So we're going to be looking at the geography in multiple ways. So here's an example of contiguity. This blue district here is a contiguous district. All parcels share at least one parcel boundary. You can connect them across the right of way like this. If you have different zoning districts that are adjacent to each other, they're still contiguous. So let's just say we split this down the middle and this part was red and that's blue. That's still a contiguous district, but it now has sub-districts. It's a red district, but a blue district and a blue district. It all counts as a contiguous district. This is a non-contiguous district, and you see it's very cleverly drawn, so it sort of slips down the street to try and connect them. You're absolutely not allowed to do that. So this is treated as though it were two separate districts, non-contiguous. If this is over 5 acres, if both of those are 5 acres, they could count, but you're probably going to need a larger district somewhere else. So it's not that you can't have smaller districts, just know you have to have that larger district somewhere. So the other thing that you need to think about is whether or not there is excluded land or public land. So in this case, this is an example of the sub-districts that we talked about earlier. You do have to follow parcel lines. You have to take the entirety of the parcel, and you can't deliberately draw around public land just to exclude it and say, we're worried that the public land might make our density go up. We'll talk about why that would be later. So we're just going to draw it around and exclude it. You can't do that. You could, however, if you had a contiguity requirement, you could include the public land to do that. Public land is automatically excluded unless it meets certain criteria. So all of these work together. Think of them as a package when drawing it, that contiguity requirement, the minimum land acre, and then how the districts are drawn. That's very important for land area. So the next part is unit capacity. We've got the land, we've got the base. Now we have to understand how many units can be built on that base. And so you have a minimum unit capacity of 1,220 units, and the calculation for doing that is here. Same thing, not only do you have to have 50% of your land area in the station, you have to have 50% of your total unit capacity in the station. And then, like everybody else, you have to have a minimum density requirement of 15 dwelling units per acre. I just want to stress that that is an average. So you can have a district that has a higher density and a district with a lower density as long as they average out to 15 units per acre. And this has been important for some communities to think about, where they definitely want to concentrate density in a smaller area, get that higher density per unit per acre. But there's some other places where they want to look at the lower amount. And I've already mentioned that unit capacity is not the same thing as a housing production target. Unit capacity just tells you what the maximum potential is for that area. Let's also talk a little bit about what multifamily can be, because I think a lot of us, when we think of multifamily, have images of very large buildings that we've seen pop up. There seem to be a lot of them along the highways for some reason, so it kind of feeds into people's thinking about it. Multifamily housing is defined as a building with 3 or more dwelling units, or 2 or more buildings on the same lot with more than one residential dwelling unit in each building. So this graphic has been around for a while. It's by a firm called Opticos, who wrote a book on the idea of missing middle housing. And they talked about the fact there's a lot of detached single family homes. This is nationwide, not just New England. There's a lot of mid-rise, but many communities don't have those middle pieces. They don't have the duplexes, the triplex and fourplex, all the way up to sort of the multiplex. So if you think of it as the 3 family, the 2 duplexes on a lot, which would meet the minimum requirements in the definition, up to like the 4 to 6 units, the 6 to 8, maybe the 8 to 20 or the 12 to 20. That's sort of what's fitting in this area. And there's a place for these different types of missing middle in a lot of different areas. There's also absolutely a place for the mid-rise or even the high-rise, but what we tried to do is think about how to right size the type of housing that you see. So we've talked a little bit about the unit capacity. You have this overall target you have to meet. We have talked about the fact that there's a variety of building types that you can do. Let's talk about how you get to that dwelling units per acre. So you start off with, say, we'll just call this 10 acres. And your zoning allows for 150 units. So at 150 units, 10 acres, 15 dwelling units per acre, math's pretty easy, you're compliant. And let's say you have to go for that 10 acres. So now we're going to talk about how that district can be impacted by restricted land. And there's 2 different types. One is called excluded land. And excluded land can't be modeled. It has to be removed. And that's public land, protected, environmentally protected land, open space, conservation land, publicly, and I should say publicly owned land, whether it's being used for a public purpose, like say, for example, a town hall can't be modeled, or whether it's vacant and not yet used for something specific, but it is publicly owned. So in this case, we've got our 10-acre district. We've got a park of 2 acres here. That gives us 8 acres that we can model. So that's our district size for the purposes of calculating density. So here we allow for 150 units on 10 acres. We are compliant because we have 15 dwelling units per acre. Here, if you had 120 units per acre, you get 15 dwelling units per acre, but we needed 10 acres for our community. So we're not actually compliant, because although we're meeting the density requirement, and we're meeting the zoning requirement, we're not meeting the acreage requirement. So I want you to think about the fact that you have to meet the land requirement, you have to meet the unit capacity requirement, and you have to meet the density requirement. So three tests there. So when we think about density, we can make different choices. So we can change the district size, the unit capacity, the zoning, and the density. So if we have a large district with a low unit capacity, fairly restrictive zoning, and fairly low density, that's probably not going to get us there. If we have sort of coming up towards the medium size of a district, higher unit capacity, more permissive zoning, more permissive, or sort of a medium to high density, that might get us there, right? So it's about thinking about how these 3 things react. And probably a large district with a lot of unit capacity, a very permissive zoning, and very high density, yeah, we're going to get there. But the question is, where does Winchester fit on these sliding scales? And we've been using this idea of levers or sliding scales to talk to people about where their community should fit. So unit capacity measurements have to work with the district land area metrics. So I mentioned before, land plus capacity gets you there. And it's this idea of pushing and pulling between the district size, the location, excluded land, very important when you're drawing your district, the zoning regulations that you put into place or that you're testing for now, and unit capacity impact that final density that you're trying to get to. So the final test for us is the zoning. And we've had a lot of questions about this in the communities that we're working in. So the why can't we count existing developments? Why can't we count projects that we know are about to be developed? We've had communities say, hey, we've got projects in the pipeline. Why can't we just count that against our unit capacity and we're done? And that's because zoning treats all lots as though they were unbuilt. Exactly. That's how zoning, that blue blob is how zoning sees land, right? It's just overlay on top of the land. There's a set of rules associated with it. But in rare cases, except in rare cases, not really taking into account what's there now. And in fact, you can see that in the zoning for a lot of traditional New England neighborhoods, where the zoning actually bears no relationship to how the neighborhood was built pre-zoning. So, you can see that in life. You may know some districts like that. And because buildings can cross parcel lines where there's no buildings on this, so you can't see that. So you could have, one building each on these larger parcels, and some of the smaller parcels actually have one big building with maybe condo units across them, right? We don't know because all we see is that blue blob of zoning on top of the parcels. So any of these types of housing or mixed use could be on those parcels. We just don't know that, right? We don't know the current conditions. So what I want you to do is think about zoning about as a possibility, what can be, not what's there now. So if the zoning changes, it gives the property owner an option to do something, and that's all. It doesn't change what's there now. That option, they can exercise that option. For anybody who's worked in finance, you might know about options from that respect. They can exercise that option to do something new, but the zoning doesn't have an impact on them unless they're changing something. So that's another piece about production. You're not going to have units automatically appear overnight, right? Because the owner of the land has to make a decision to do something. They may not want to. If you've got a building like this, for example, or a building like this, which is actually relatively new construction, you may not want to exercise your option to do something differently because you already have a valuable piece. So when you think of unit capacity, think of it as a measure of the possibility of what could happen based on the zoning. It's not a count of existing or projected dwelling units. So when we start to think about zoning, we start to think about how we can build it to be compliant with the guidelines. And these are the things that the compliance model checks for, but doesn't necessarily measure. So you can't have zoning that is compliant. Rather, it can't mandate an age restriction for housing because this has to be open to families per the legislation. And because of that, it also can't regulate the size of units in square feet. So you can't sit there and say, hey, we've got multifamily housing, but you can only do a unit of 200 square feet or a unit of 300 square feet. Micro housing is not allowed in this case. Or you can't determine micro housing. Somebody could come along and propose it. It might be allowed under your zoning, but you can't specify it. The bedroom size or mix of bedrooms can't be regulated under the zoning. The size of bedrooms in square feet. You can't regulate or limit the number of occupants in a unit. You also cannot mandate mixed use development in the MBTA district. And this has been a very confusing piece for people because early rumors that were going around said, oh, that means we can't have mixed use. That's absolutely not true at all. You can have mixed use, you just can't mandate mixed use. There is a new wrinkle, EOHLC gave guidelines for how you could look at the capacity of mixed use districts to help reduce the number of units that you produce. There's an offset to it, but that mixed use district is not the same thing as the MBTA district. So if we need to talk about that, we can do, but just to let you know, they're not the same thing. Affordable housing requirements. So this is all about making sure that units can be produced. So the legislation is silent on affordable housing. The compliance guidelines state that you can't exceed 10% of the total units offered, which by the way means that you need to round down. It's interesting because a lot of communities have zoning that requires that you round up. So that is something to watch for. And it has to be at no less than 80% of the area median income. If you want to go above 10%, below 80%, you have to complete an economic feasibility analysis to prove that that deeper affordability requirement is in fact doable in your community. And some communities are going in that direction because they want the deeper affordability. So in addition to what the MBTA guidelines require, we have to think about how this could happen. And so these parameters on this page are what we enter into the compliance model to help us determine compliance. And in some cases, they flow directly into the model itself and are used to calculate the unit capacity. And in other cases, they act as a flag to HLC when they're reviewing it if somebody's requirements are out of whack. So for example, I'll pick on setbacks for a moment. Setbacks don't actually feed into the calculations of capacity, but if you had a requirement for a 10,000 square foot parcel as your minimum parcel size and your front yard setback, so the line from your front parcel line to the line of the building was say 100 feet and your rear setback was 100 feet from the rear line to the building, those would raise an eyebrow with HLC because essentially you're setting your setback so deep that you probably couldn't produce anything on it. So some of these just raise a flag for their review. And of course, the more restrictive your zoning, the more of these that you use, because some of them do work against each other if you use too many. The fewer units that you're going to get. So that's something to think about. A lot of communities, when floor area ratio, which was a ratio, is a ratio of the lot size to the gross floor area of the building. When that came into play, you saw a lot of communities going, oh, we have building height, we have building coverage, we should add floor area ratio too. And you found out that they all work together. And in fact, you couldn't produce anything that the community wanted to produce because they start working against each other. So we have to be very careful when we look at those. So let's bring it all together into one big thing. You have the land area requirements, so the minimum land area, the amount within the station area, the minimum size of one district, which again will vary by your total amount, your minimum district size. You have your unit capacity requirements and the minimum units, the minimum the station area, and then you have your minimum density in terms of dwelling units per acre. Now, I'm going to stop there because I want to give you all a chance to ask any questions before we move on. I will say we normally do this in person, so people are kind of interrupting with questions, but I want to stop. If you need us to go back to any of the slides, I'm happy to do so. And as I said, you'll have this afterwards. Taylor, I made a few adjustments to the one I sent you, so I'll send this after the meeting. Any questions so far?
With regard to the public land, I wasn't clear what I didn't quite follow how there's a hazard there.
Yes.
When we look at the maps, I guess we had the public land in there, but why would you exclude it, and why would excluding it be a problem?
Yeah, so let's go back to this because I think it's a bit bigger image. That is an excellent question. It trips a lot of people up. You exclude it because you're required to exclude it. So I mentioned the GIS side of this. When the state gives us the GIS information, and what happened was a couple of agencies worked together to create a database that all of the towns and cities and any consultants helping them, of course, could pull down the same data created under the same criteria so that everybody was drawing from the same pool. So there's parcel data, and then there is the geographic data. And the geographic data includes excluded land and sensitive land. Excluded land are those types of land that have to be excluded from the denominator of the density calculation. So your numerator is dwelling units, the number of dwelling units. Your denominator is the land area, your acres. So your total calculation is dwelling units per acre. Excluded land is taken out of the number of acres that you base your calculation on. And so what happens is you actually have to go up in density if you've got excluded land within your area in order to meet the minimum dwelling units per acre. The reason the land is excluded is because it is considered by the state to not be buildable for housing. So it includes Title V, it includes wetlands, it includes parklands, designated parkland. Public land comes into it because public land is, your towns and cities aren't generally in the business of developing housing. It's restricted because it's public land. However, there is an override component to that. And that is if you are a community that has a disposition process already in place for public land for the purposes of housing, you can override that in the model, flag it to tell HLC that's what you're doing, and then you can count it. There are a couple of communities. So, for example, if you're a community that has a school that's currently marked as public property, it's owned by the town, and you are actually in the process of disposing that property for the purposes of housing. I just worked on a community last year, not an MBTA community, to do this. So, it's a reasonable example. You're actively in the process of disposing of that for housing. You can count it as part of the model. It means that you are able to count the unit capacity on that land as part of your own capacity, your overall capacity. If you are doing this, where you've got Brook Park here, you can't count any units that would be produced on that land because it's excluded land. So to get to your 15 units per acre, you've only got the 8 acres to work with. That means the density is going to have to be higher on those.
But can you include it to get to your total acreage, even though you're not including the units?
Yes, you can do that. So
that's what confused me. So you're including it for the acreage, but not for the formula.
Yeah, and let me just run back to this one. So this one, for example, here where we're showing this area, somebody drew around the public land, which you can't do. But you could absolutely, if you wanted to get to your total acreage, you include that public land within your district. Just know that the units on either side of that public land or other excluded land are going to have to be higher in density in order to get to your average of 15 units per acre. That's a great question.
Thanks.
Yeah. I will just add that there is a second category of land called sensitive land, and that includes floodplains. It includes some additional Title V and wetlands buffers. That is in there. So communities who are concerned about that type of land, water resource land, communities who are concerned about that can see its location relative to the districts that they're testing, but it is absolutely okay to test that as to include the unit capacity on those. That's more of a community choice as opposed to something that is absolutely excluded. Michelle, I see your hand up. And that's Michelle McCarthy, just in case there's more than one. You are muted, though.
I was on my phone. Now I'm on the computer. Okay. Hi, folks. This is Michelle McCarthy. I'm with the Winchester Historic Commission. So I think everyone knows under Massachusetts general law, I'm sort of tasked with advocating for historic preservation. And one of my questions is, have you seen it, like Winchester Town Center itself is a National Register Historic District? Wouldn't that be sensitive? Wouldn't that fall under this definition that you just said of things that can be excluded since it is a National Register Historic District? Or have we seen anything like that in another town?
Great, terrific question. I'm so glad you asked about that. Not related to the MBTA Communities Act. I have in other communities done a lot of work on historic preservation and redevelopment and thinking about how to create zoning that creates incentives to keep historic buildings. So I love the question. Yes, you should consider it as something that is important to you in your zoning, but historic buildings can be adaptively reused for a number of purposes. So the model is agnostic on historic buildings, but that doesn't mean that your zoning shouldn't be. So your zoning should consider it. So that should be part of this conversation is how do we think about the fact that these historic buildings exist? How do we think about them in terms of the strategy for multifamily housing? Is there some sort of zoning provision that we can put in that encourages those buildings to be capped, to be sensitively reused, perhaps sensitively reused for housing? That's all part of the community conversation. And that's why it is so important for communities to use the MBTA Communities Act as an opportunity to talk about what is important within that community in terms of how it's actually implemented. So that's a great question, Michelle.
Thank you.
Anybody else at this point?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Emily, it's a terrific presentation. In the last slide that you were presenting, there are numbers of the land area and unit.
Let me see if I can get back to that. Hang on.
I'm just curious, like which number is the one that we are using for Winchester? Like the land area requirements, is it 37 acres or 223 acres? Like there are 4 numbers and yeah, just want to be more clear.
Absolutely. So in some ways you're using all of them. 37 acres is the minimum land area you have to have. 50% of that, 50% of that has to be within your station area. You have actually, you know what? That's a typo. Good catch, Wenji. So 18.5 acres would be your minimum land area in the station area. You have 446 acres within your station area. So, but that is if you only do 37 acres. If you do 50 acres, 25 acres of those would have to be in your station area. So the requirement is 50% of your total district, whatever that district ends up being. Your minimum district size, again, is 18.5 acres if you're doing the minimum 37 acres. You may find, again, depending on the strategy that you're doing, you're almost certainly going to be above your minimum. We've been finding that with communities and confuses them a little bit, but then when they start realizing that they're tailoring it to their particular needs, they understand why. The minimum units of 1,220 and minimum units in the station area, that one is correct. So just replace that 223 acres with that 18.5 and you'll understand. I'm glad you caught that.
Thanks.
Ellen.
223 sounds very high. So
yeah, that was our mistake for not copying it across correctly. So thank you. Ellen.
Thanks.
Hi. I'm unmuted, I hope.
You are unmuted.
Okay.
Can hear you loud and clear.
I'm Ellen Spencer. I'm the representative from the Design Review Committee of Winchester. And I wanted to just follow up on Michelle's question, observation, just with a kind of a larger question that we had when we met last week. We had a special meeting to elect a rep to this group, and I understand that this is specifically being called out as looking at North Main Street, but to my knowledge, there are 2 overlay districts currently on the table. The other one being the downtown area that Michelle spoke about. And I don't understand why this group isn't focusing on both of those. And I'd like to kind of understand that.
So great question. I am going to show the districts that were tested earlier this year after we answer the more general questions, but just to let you know that this group was convened for two purposes, and I see the members of the planning board. So if I get it wrong, feel free to jump in and correct me. But we've actually got two projects going on. One is the North Main Street corridor. One is the 3A discussion, and they happen to overlap in one piece. And actually the maps I show you on the next set of slides will show where that overlap is. So yes, we are talking more than just North Main Street.
Okay,
And
I think we need, I mean, because I think we have to be, we can't just be, we can't just be ignoring the downtown area.
Once you see the maps, hold your question and come back and tell me if I've got the right geography, but I'll show those to you in a minute or two.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other, oh, Jamie.
Yeah, thank you. Related to Michelle's question, I think Ellen's, I think there are a lot of people that are concerned about historic and the picturesque quality of the town center. And I'm coming to this a little late, but I am curious, in terms of an MBTA community, we have Winchester Center, we have Wedgmere train station, and we have Route 3, which has the 350 bus, which connects Alewife with Leahy Clinic and the Burlington Mall. It's a pretty significant bus route, which I used to take. And I'm curious why we're focusing just on Winchester Center and don't seem to be, we don't seem to be considering Wedgmere or Route 3, which has, I believe, plenty of acreage for some significant housing along it.
Jamie, that's an excellent question, which I'm going to totally duck and dodge because I wasn't part of the process that decided to which districts to test initially. So I'm going to turn that over to Diab and any other members of the planning board who want to address that. So Diab.
Hi. So that is a good question. So we're faced. Let me start with the 3A question. And that is that we are, our two station areas are Winchester Center and Wedgmere. And so our half-mile station area has to be around one of those two. So when we look at the type of development that's existent in those two areas, and remember, we have to have 18 acres. So if we're going to look at, say, let's say we take a look at Wedgmere and we draw a half-mile circle around Wedgmere and we look at how much acreage we have in there, which is, so essentially all of that area pretty much is composed of either DCR land or it's composed of primarily single-family dwellings. So if we're going to get to a 15 acres, 15 dwelling units per acre around Wedgmere, we're going to have to change a lot of the existing structure of those neighborhoods into a much more denser structure. So when we look at the downtown, and this is something that I think will become more apparent when we look at the compliance models that our consultants drafted, we find that the existing density in the downtown is already there. So we don't have to do any sort of rezoning in terms of increasing density or increasing building height or anything. The rezoning that happened back, 10 years ago has already accomplished all that we need to do in order to meet the compliance for density and unit size or unit capacity. So the impact is the difference in the change in zoning to accommodate, to turn Wedgmere into an area that's compliant, a much heavier lift. Because you're essentially going in and you're turning it all into multifamily where it's currently all single family or some non-compliant things which are there prior to zoning. So I think that's the main reason that we're looking at the CBD center is just because we've already got we meet all the criteria without having really to do much. And so the other question is, where do we get the extra area that we need? And the reason for going up North Main Street is because we already been considering how we revitalize North Main Street, in particular, how we bring more density there to enliven the streetscape and to support the local businesses. And it turns out that when we look at the half-mile radius from the town center, it overlaps quite nicely with the southern part of North Main Street up to Clark. Clark Street is essentially the half-mile mark. And so when we overlap the plans for North Main Street and the CBD, it provides a very nice contiguous land area. So we can pretty much do that. When you look at Cambridge Street, pretty much the only places that you could imagine that aren't existing single family lots might be, say, the Mahoney's lot, or if you go up to Bunnell. So everything else is pretty much, we could rezone those as multifamily. There's, if that's the way the town wants to go. But those are the considerations that went into it. Then
Okay. Can I ask one more thing or follow up? Thank you. I guess I was curious. I realize for sure that Winchester Center will be get some rezoning for more multifamily, but what about the non-contiguous aspect of it, i.e., maybe a little bit at Wedgemere? And then also, I really do think you're right. Mahoney's is lots of acres. If they were to sell off a bit of land, it could be multifamily as opposed to lots, cul-de-sac with single family. Same with Bunnell Ford, and there's land adjacent to Bunnell Ford that seems ripe for multifamily. So I'm just sort of curious, does it all have to be concentrated in the center, since there's a lot of precious stuff going on in the center and small streets, or could it be non-contiguous? And in fact, the half-mile circle with Winchester Center intersects with Wedgemere. So I guess that's my question. Not like everything all at one spot.
So that really gets down to, as Emily pointed out, anything that's non-contiguous has to have a land area of 5 acres.
Yes, yes.
And so there are, to give you an idea of how big 5 acres is, in the preliminary model we have, the park view is included because it is actually larger than 5 acres, but park view is 8 acres. So 5 acres is quite a large amount of land to find.
Right.
And so, for instance, we looked at all of the new 40Bs, and those are all much smaller than 5 acres, so we couldn't include them. So when you're trying to get 5 acres is a lot of land to find in one area. So even if you would have to, and again, you remember, they have to be contiguous. So you would have to go all the way, you'd have to figure out what 5-acre lot down 3A, Cambridge Street. And for instance, I don't believe Mahoney is contiguous with Bunnell. So that's an issue. So I don't know the size of those lots. But again, we looked around town to try to find those big areas, and there just aren't that many. So.
Thank you.
I see Michelle's hand back up again.
Hi, hi, question. Yeah, did folks look at the school that is, I don't know what you call it, it's basically on Main Street at the Rotary there, where you could basically, if that turned into housing, you could walk to the Wedgemere stop. Was that considered at all? I know it's a school and the town owns it, but I'm just curious. That seems like it would be within a half a mile of Wedgemere.
Are you talking about Mystic?
I don't think that's even called. It's like where Winchester Rec is housed. And
yeah,
there's like
that's far too small.
The
Again,
whole lot. The lot. I guess I didn't understand the square footage. The whole lot seems really big. That school and the whole parking lot and everything.
It's not 5 acres.
It's not 5 acres. Okay.
It's the key is, whenever you think of an area, think it's got to be 5 acres, or I somehow have to attach it. So for instance, if you wanted to say, let's grab Wedgemere and make it part of the CBD part, then you've got to take all the land between Wedgemere and the Center Business District and create that district.
Is that something though that you can't like negotiate with the state and say like,
nope.
hey, we're not
Nope.
okay.
Nope.
I'm just trying to
Nope.
Obviously, you've done a lot of work on this. I'm sorry to be coming to it late. I just was trying to figure out.
Those are very good
Get this
questions.
number,
And
you know.
unfortunately, the answer to a lot of your questions can be, and the answer is no.
Okay, well, thank you
The state has been
thank
very
you for letting me
adamant.
dream. Thank you for letting me try to figure it out.
Yeah,
Okay.
no,
Thank
keep
you.
asking those
And
questions.
one question I just have to throw out. I went to the most exciting field hockey game in Lexington tonight. I had to drive through Lexington Center, and we all go through Lexington. It's such a beautiful town and all the buildings. And it was really interesting that I was there right before the Zoom. And I thought, oh, Lexington Center doesn't have a commuter rail, so they don't have to deal with this. But do they, with that interesting question that Jamie just raised with the bus, do they have to do with it for a bus? Or I guess it was a good question, I thought she said, but now I'm hearing what you're saying. Mahoney's is not enough 5 acres around.
And Lexington has already passed their zoning, and they have actually gone way beyond what the state is requiring. So if you want to look at, Lexington.
Nope, I don't want to go beyond. I don't.
No, I'm just letting you know that Lexington, I think, is probably it's the first big community, I believe, which has done this, and they did this a long time ago. So you can take a look at what Lexington did and try to understand how they did it. And they have in some ways, it's more difficult for them because they have to look all over the place and try to stitch things together. So I'm going to get out of this conversation because this is Emily's show. I'm going to tell you the state says no. Emily will tell you how we get to where yes. So
okay, thanks, guys.
So I'll add a few things, and I see Hank's hand up. So and also Ellen, your hand up again. So just so you know, Lexington did pass. I haven't spoken to HLC about it in a while, but the last time I checked, Lexington hadn't received their final approval from HLC. So I need to run back and figure out if that has happened. But just so you know, their minimum requirement was 1,231 units. And their minimum land area requirement was 50 acres as opposed to your 37 acres and 1,220 units. So they're pretty close. They do not, as you noted, they don't have a developable station area. So they do have their entire town in which to locate their requirements. But it's just interesting, the bit of comparability there. So Hank, I saw you first and then Alan, and then we'll come back.
Yeah, I just want to say something just on top of what everyone says. Just looking at Winchester zoning map, actually we have a RA 120 where the Winchester Community Park sit, and across the railroad we do have an industrial zone. I think that should be where we should consider.
Excellent. When we get to the maps of what was looked at, we'll delve a little bit further into the geography. So, Ellen, did you have another question, or were you just hanging there for the maps? Oh, you're muted.
Okay, no, sorry. Just and I think probably I don't want to take up a lot of time because this is again more for planning as what board too. But I know that being on the design review committee, and as in the last few years when we've had things, additions for whatever reason, things to come up in the what's called our center business district. There, a lot of owners have wanted to put third stories on their buildings, and not every historic building is eminently is really adaptable. And in fact, that we had consultants confirm that. So, I mean, I guess I'm just concerned down the road that, as we go into this process, that we how is this going to work with our center business district zoning already in those design guidelines? And I don't want to see open season on all these historic buildings. So that's all I want to say for now.
So it's a good point, and I think you'll all be happy to hear that there's a couple of ways of addressing that in the zoning. You can require, even though it's as of right, you can require site plan review. In the sample zoning, there are guidelines of how to set up not just the site plan review process, but also development standards that can be considered. You can also set up advisory design guidelines. There's a way of setting up a provision in the zoning to allow the planning board to adopt design guidelines that can, while advisory, can certainly talk to how, infill buildings, new buildings, rehab of buildings can work within the existing context. So we do have that to talk about, not tonight, it's a longer conversation, but
and those things already exist within the CBD. So I'm just,
yes.
I'm just confused.
So we have to think about how to tie them in,
Correct.
right? So yeah, absolutely. So that should be part of the conversation. On the district geography, you can have 5-acre districts. You can have multiple, you can have any number of districts, right? Each district must be at least 5 acres or more than 5 acres. And you have to have one big district. So that's just something to remember. If you were talking about multiple properties, if you have multiple properties of a size that don't quite add up to 5 acres, then you would, as Diab noted, have to connect them somehow. And so that would be important as we look at the geography. So seeing no other questions, and we can always go back to what the provisions of the model and what we have to consider are. I'm just going to reshare my screen. Just wanted to drop it earlier so people could see each other's faces while I talked. And it should be back up now. So let's talk about what J.M. Goldson. J.M. Goldson is another planning firm. They, like Ennis Associates, like RKG Associates, have been providing technical assistance to communities. There's a sort of a pool of consultants that have been doing that. And one of the things that we've all been doing in the early work with communities is helping them understand whether or not they're compliant with the Zoning Act, and if so, with the MBTA Communities Act, rather, and if so, that's great. And if not, how do they get there? So what I'm going to show you is not my work. It is the work of J.M. Goldson. And we've reformatted it so it would fit into this presentation, but there is a technical report that the planning board has received as part of their meetings. So they did test 3 initial scenarios, and you can see scenario 1 here, where they looked at the CBD, the General Business District 2, and the General Business District 3. They found, and again, planning board members feel free to jump in because I'm just summarizing from their report, but they found that they did meet the goals for unit capacity, minimum acreage, and capacity within the station area, which is terrific. There was a working group that worked with them and found that there was a couple of concerns. One of them is preserving what was currently in place in terms of the zoning. I think Diab already talked a little bit about that, but also that idea of preserving first floor commercial in key areas. And that is something that a lot of communities have wrestled with, where it seems like their town center is the ideal place to put multifamily, but they also want to make sure their town center stays as a commercial center. And there's a couple of different ways to think about creating zoning incentives for mixed-use buildings that supplement or enhance the multifamily requirement, and that's certainly something that we can talk about. So the second scenario that they tested was Central Business District without certain parcels, General Business District without certain parcels, Apartment House B, Residential District B, General Business District with special permit, and multiple family residential districts A. Again, met the minimum requirements for unit capacity, exceeded the station area requirements, but they had some contiguity problems because of excluding certain parcels. And so that threw that scenario out. So they tested a third scenario, same sort of thing, portions of different zoning districts, some of them flowing through from the previous one, found that they exceeded the requirements for land area and capacity for land area and capacity within the station area, that they could do compliant districts entirely within the station area, and that they had to exclude specific parcels. They addressed that commercial use on the first floor by excluding specific parcels in East Core and Town Common. And so here are the maps, and I just want to orient you a little bit. There's the District 1, and we can go back and forth between the maps and the district names. District 3, District 2 is this sort of gray color, and District 4 is this teal color, at least it's teal on my screen. But I wanted to call it out because this right here is the overlap with the North Main Street District. And so I said at the beginning that this group is going to be working with the North Main Street corridor, the planning for that, the zoning for that, and also with 3A. This is where we're overlapping, and I'm calling that out in each of the maps just to orient ourselves. So we talked a little bit about excluded land, and this is what excluded land includes. It's hydrological features, so water, streams, surface water, streams, ponds, brooks, etc. Protected or restricted open space, wellhead protection areas, Title V setback, public rights of way. And this is really important because that means your roads are in your district for total district size, as Nick asked about earlier, but are not, you can't build a house or a multifamily dwelling on a public right of way. So it's not included for your district capacity. And then most public land, except for the things that we talked about earlier, your ability to exclude it. So you can see this pink overlay here is your excluded land. There's a school there. Town hall is in the area. So that's called out there. And then this is sensitive land. And so in terms of unit capacity, you can model that for the unit capacity, and it includes the additional wellhead protection areas, special flood hazard areas, active farmland, which has been important in some of the adjacent communities and adjacent small towns, priority habitats, and then surface water protection zones. So one of the things that I work with communities on is checking the rest of their zoning to see if there's quite often overlay districts for special flood hazard areas. There's water resource protection districts. And one of the things I do is work with them to check the rest of their zoning, because sometimes it's not as simple as just putting an overlay. There's something buried in the rest of the zoning that we need to look at that might unintentionally be preventing multifamily housing. So that's something we'll do a little bit later in the process. Diab, your hand's up.
Thank you, Emily. I just thought I wanted to point out that the map you see in front of you is not our latest updated map, because we have a few additions, some changes which we unfortunately were unable to get in before the state's consultant finished their contract. So when you see something, for instance, you'll notice the Wedge Pond condos aren't in the area. Those will be put into the final area because they do give us an existing lot, which we can use for area and density. And there are some lots that are going to be excluded. So there's a little bit of editing in this map, but the gross properties of it are correct. So you'll see that, for instance, if you look at the downtown commercial areas, they're not in the overlay areas. They're kept out. So the gross details are in this map are correct, but there are a couple of things that need to be tweaked. So if there's something that catches your eye, please ask, and we can address that. I just also want to point out we have about 5 minutes, and then we have to open our hearing. But that's it. Thank you.
I think I've got 5 minutes of presentation left, and then we can open the hearing and go back to Q&A and discussion. So thanks for the update. I'm also glad you mentioned that there's some geographic changes, because as we progress with the discussion and starting to revise the zoning into a final form, just know that when collectively you all are making decisions about what that zoning looks like and what's in it, I'll be rerunning the model at strategic points to make sure we stay in compliance when we make changes. So this is what was tested at the time. You can see lot size, building height. There are more that went in there, but I just pulled out the things that have a direct impact on a compliance model. Again, you can look at the whole report. Lot coverage, open space, floor area ratio. As you can see, some things are applicable in some areas and not others. Parking spaces per dwelling unit and maximum dwelling units per acre. as the input into the compliance model. And then this is the output from the compliance model. So you can see the modeled results totaled 1,500, so above your minimum. Minimum land area was above your minimum. Your unit capacity and your land area within the transit area, you more than meet that, which is terrific. Your density is above. And again, this quite often happens is that there's these minimum requirements when you start to put things on top of actual parcels, actual, distribution of land. It is rare to be able to come to precisely the minimum, right? Because math doesn't necessarily work that way. And then you can see broken out among the districts what this looks like. I didn't have from the report the area calculations. So you can see one of the interesting pieces here is although you're averaging 34.1 dwelling units per acre, you're actually having two areas that are under the 15 units per acre average because you've got two areas that are above that. So you are averaging out at above your 15 units per acre. And so with that, I think I've got 2 minutes before your hearing. So I'll just use those 2 minutes to say, we are having two public meetings, and we'll come back to this at the end as a reminder. We're going to do a public meeting next week, a virtual public meeting, which is essentially an introduction to both the North Main Street and to the 3A, and also a public meeting in person, hooray, on November 21st. And we'll talk about that when we get to that point. So I'm going to stop it here, stop sharing my screen, and turn it over to you, Diab, to lead us into that continuation.
Thanks. Well, we've got 2 minutes. So what I want to do is I just want to point out that if people look at that slide of the inputs that went into these models, what's important is that when the consultants looked at the center business district, we actually have a wide variety of we have different zones. We've got the East Core, the museum district. And so what they did is they took sort of a conservative look and said, here's what your existing zoning kind of looks like, and we're going to put it in the model. And that's what's in the model. So what we're seeing again is the inputs are our existing zoning. So I think that's an important thing. We are Taylor can corroborate this. We are so lucky in that we can comply with existing zoning. But now I do have to ask our zoning board or our planning board to open up our hearing. So this is a continuation of the CBD 18 hearing on the Waterfield development, the Civico Causeway development. And so we are going to open it up and then postpone it until 8:45. And so if I could get a motion to open that hearing.
I move to open the hearing at this time.
And is there a second, please?
I second it.
Okay, great. All in favor? Nick?
Aye.
Carrie?
Aye.
Yi Ching?
Aye.
Sally?
Aye.
And I say aye as well. Can I have a motion to continue this hearing until 8:45 this evening?
So moved.
Okay, and someone want to claim a second on that?
Second.
Thank you. And let's do a roll call vote on that as well. Nick?
Aye.
Yi Ching?
Aye.
Carrie?
Aye.
Sally?
Aye.
And I say aye as well. Thank you all very much. And I think we turn it right back over to you, Emily.
Sounds terrific. Thank you. So with that, we're at the discussion point. I want to make sure that you have time in the next 14 minutes or so to ask any additional questions, and then we'll talk a little bit about the public meetings. So Ellen, you had your question. I remembered for the geography and the central business district. Is there anything else you wanted to add to that? Can I pull it back up on a slide for you to look at?
No, I just would I'd be curious to see, to get a copy of whatever the most current map is, just to be, so that we're all on the same page. I don't know if that's going to be in another report or whatever.
I actually don't have that map yet. So
no,
yeah.
But yeah, no, I don't have anything else at this time.
Okay, great. Hank, your hand's up.
So Emily, can you go back to one slide, just a little last slide? Because you're
Yes.
modeling. So I think I have a quick question. Just what are
This
current?
one?
No, yes, this one. So essentially, for I think we do kind of looking at 4 districts, and for existing zoning, I think my question is, for your modeling, what will be the existing zoning already compliant?
Okay. So just to clarify, first of all, this is not my model. This is the work that J.M. Goldson
Okay.
did, that firm did in the spring. So I can answer a limited amount of questions to this because I don't actually have access to the underlying model. So District 4 here, these are the parameters that were tested. So a minimum lot size of 0, a maximum lot size of 3 stories, a lot coverage of 40, an open space of 60, floor area ratio. That's a ratio of the lot size to the gross building footprints or gross building square footage. So basically what it says is that you can have the same amount of square footage in your building as you have on your lot, but it doesn't speak to how that's distributed across the stories. Parking spaces per dwelling unit of 2, and then there was not a maximum dwelling units per acre. So when they put when J.M. Goldson put those parameters in, along with the geography in District 4, and the geography in District 4 is this teal area here, then they came out with these outputs.
Thank you. I think looking at I-120 for that Parkview parcel, so even I believe that parcel already go beyond 235 at this moment. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So same thing with RA, is this was what was tested, along with the geography, obviously, for that, and that's how they got to the input. John.
Yes, J.M. Goldson, they developed this for the town. Who instructed them from the town to develop what they developed?
I can answer that. So this started off last year when the initial set of models was done by town planner Brian Zakelli working with Brian Manter, and they came up with the original original districts in the CBD, and that original one covered all of the CBD. And so as that was turned over to our consultants, and the people from the planning board who worked there with Sally Dale and myself were the primary ones working with them to refine and to try to provide some protection for the commercial space. And to be honest, the key driver in our models has always been the amount of area that we need. We've always been able to accommodate the density and the number of units, but what has driven this is how do we find the extra area to get us to that 37 acres. So that's where that came from.
I'm with you there 100%. What I'm trying to understand is they're eliminating all of the property around the train station. That's what has me complexed.
So the answer to that, John, is that the 3A legislation requires that if you designate an area as multifamily by right, you cannot put in a requirement for any sort of commercial establishment. So if we look at the preservation, if we want to look at the downtown and look at preservation of the first floor commercial establishments, then we can either go about it in well, there are 3 ways we could do it. One is we can exclude those buildings from the overlay districts. 2, we could make them all by right multifamily, and then we would have to put in some sort of incentive for developers to put in commercial. And you might do that by saying, well, if you put in a commercial first floor, we'll allow you to increase the density of units on that site so that it's financially feasible for you to do so. Because as we all know, building commercial units does not make any developer money. They only do it because they're required to. So if you want, so I think I said 3, but I only came up with 2. So this is actually a question that this group can help advise the planning board is, how do we protect the commercial center of town and still provide opportunities for housing? So one way, again, is to exclude them. The other is to provide incentives to developers, but then you're talking about providing, extra density. And so there's a balancing act. So what this model does is it gives us compliance, and it's probably the most conservative model we can use to give us compliance. So we can always open it up and add more areas. And the point is, we have a base model which works. And if we want to change that, we at least know we've got something that works. And if you want to open up more areas to allow more multifamily by right along some of the commercial corridors, we can do that. It's,
Okay.
that's something we can explore. But again, you've got people who think there's too much development already. So we got to do that balance. So,
I understand. Okay. The question was answered. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Wenji, is it Wenji or Venji?
It's Wenji.
Wenji. Okay, great. You're next.
So I'm a little confused. So I heard that we don't need to change the zoning of the existing district. So what are we supposed to do? And John, Dad also mentioned so incentives and things like that. But if we're not changing zoning, what's going to be changed next?
Emily, do you want to take that, or should I take that?
Why don't you take it first, and then I'm happy to go on to the next steps.
Okay. So that's a very good question, and I apologize for being a little confusing on that. So what this legislation says is that you must allow multifamily development by right. And currently, in our center business district, there are some locations where that's not allowed by right. You have to come in with a special permit in order to get the multifamily housing. And so what the state has said is that you have to set aside some areas where you don't need a special permit. And so the zoning changes are to create overlay districts where you can go in and build the multifamily housing without the extra work. But when I say we don't have to change things, I'm talking about things like height, setbacks, those sort of things. So that the physical dimensions of what can be put there, we don't have to change that part of the zoning. We do have to create districts where you can go in and do the multi-housing by right. And I don't know if the by right question is something that you need answered. I think there's a lot of people may not understand what by right means versus special permit. And so what by right means is that you can essentially go to the building department, drop off your plans, and you're approved to go through. You may have to go through a design review or a site plan review, but you cannot be prevented from doing your project. What a special permit is that you actually, you have to go through a review by a board, which can deny your project. So you have to ask for a special permit, and the board, in this case for the Center Business District, it would be the planning board. For other parts of town, it's the zoning board of appeals. They can review your project and deny you the ability to do so. And what the state wants to do is since they want to provide more housing, they want to remove obstacles. They want to make sure that a developer can come in and simply drop their plans off at the building department and not worry about a board denying them the ability to do that. So that's the difference at a high level of by right and special permit. And Emily will hopefully clean that up.
So what I will add is you can allow or require site plan review so that the board is looking over the plans and making sure it meets certain requirements, which are limited to aspects of the site, the placement of the building of the site, circulation, stormwater, etc. The board cannot deny a site plan review except under really limited circumstances. So it's, again, it's essentially a building permit, but with an extra step added to that. So the next step is, we have to allow the town has to allow it as of right. The question becomes, in which areas does the town allow multifamily as of right? They've started testing certain areas for consideration. And then under what conditions are they allowing it as of right, which is divided into the dimensional standards, which, as Diab said, you've already tested, and the indications from those tests are that they work. So it's maybe not a change to the dimensional standards, but it may be a change to development standards. It may be creating those incentives for commercial uses so that you don't push desired commercial uses out of the area. So it's really the conditions under which it's allowed as of right that you all will be providing input in as we move forward with the process.
Thanks for the explanation. That's very clear. Another question for the District 3. That's the Parkview District. So that's already mid-rise, high density area. And it seems like, I don't know, like how much possibility of any changes there. So just questioning why we include that into this development if it's already hard to change existing condition. And I learned from Emily that we shouldn't count on that, but it's hard to ignore the reality.
Right. So I don't mean to seem a little, this is a little bit of a shell game, and I hesitate, I'm sorry to call it that. But again, we're talking, when you're looking, as Emily said, when you look at the land, ignore what's on there and just look at the boundaries. So we can use existing lots, with existing densities. And so Parkview happens to be of the right size that we can add it to our total, and that gives us the area we need. So when we looked at, you looked at the numbers that went into Parkview, so the 7 stories, that's the existing Parkview of 7 stories. But it turns out that it's more likely if Parkview were ever to be demolished, it would probably not go up to 7 stories because of current building code. It would be too expensive. But the thing that is more important about Parkview is they're condos. They're individually owned. There are like 300 individually owned units. So yeah, it's very rare. I can't imagine the circumstances where someone would be able to buy out all 300 and demolish it. But that is not the way the state is counting things. The state is simply saying you need to have zoning which accommodates this. And if that lot accommodates it, then we can count it. For instance, we can also count the wedge condos, because no one's going to tear the wedge condos down, but they have the right size area that we can use. It's contiguous with the town center. It's got the right density, so we can add those in. And they just, it's a game you play. How do you meet that? And part of the game is meeting the base criteria, and then there's a question of, do we want to do more in order to add more housing? So I mean, that's the kind of play you have to do. And I'm sorry, Emily, if I make it sound like this sort of silly exercise of trying to put square things into round holes, but that's kind of the way it is.
No, not at all. It's part of the strategy that each community looks at, right? Is how do they meet the housing needs? How do they look at what's already in the area? And maybe that land gets them to the capacity. And so it's the mix that's appropriate for each strategy. There's no way that this is a one size fits all implementation. So, it's important to understand what's on the ground. I want to make sure that we get to Steve and we get to Michelle as well. So Steve, you're next.
Sure. I think you might have answered it. I'm really interested in sort of the missing middle conversation out of this whole thing. But can we have, and if we pick an area to comply with 3A, does it all have to be zoned the same? Or can it be Okay, you're shaking your head. All right, fair enough. Good. All right. That I felt like we were going to have a problem with if we included Parkview, but that doesn't seem to be the case. Okay, and no, I think actually I'll stop on that one because I think you answered all the other ones. So I'll let Michelle go.
Okay. And I'll just say that's where the sub-districts come in, Steve. You have the ability to vary the zoning by sub-districts within a larger area or by having multiple areas. So it's absolutely a valid question. It's a really good one.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Michelle.
Just putting on my legal hat, when I read the language, it almost sounds like we have to put housing near the Wedgemere. But it sounds like Giab is saying we don't because it just doesn't have the land around it. Is that correct?
You have to have a certain portion within the transit area, but you have multiple choices for transit areas. So it's not that you have to have it within each transit area. You can pick one, you can pick, so yeah.
I mean, because it's, when I read the language, it said that it sounds like you have to put it, but it's a little fuzzy, so, okay. And I guess my other question on Wedgemere, so don't keep bringing it up and driving everyone crazy, is that when you pass Wedgemere train station, you're driving down to the lake. Is all that land on the left MBTA owned and DCR owned? Is that what, it's not Winchester owned? Is that what it is? That's why. Okay. Thank you for explaining that.
Many people don't know this, but is it called Glen Fields? No. Ginfield is actually DCR land.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yes. So there's a lot of land that's DCR, and so it just doesn't work.
My final question that I can think of right now is there any wiggle room on the number of units? Because when you say to, I think, a town meeting member or, anyone who's grown up around here, like, oh, hey, we're going to add 1,220 units to downtown. I mean, people look at you like we're crazy. So when you look at these maps, I think it's really helpful. But I guess I'm just saying, like, is there wiggle room? Can we negotiate with the state? Because that's a lot of units.
Michelle, we're already zoned for that many units.
Okay.
The key thing
I'm just thinking of the impact on the schools and, if kids live in each unit, I mean, I'm thinking of overrides and schools and people.
So here's my favorite way of thinking about the impact on schools. We have this vast reservoir of empty bedrooms in town. We have many, many houses which have empty bedrooms, and there were more empty bedrooms probably than all of the units that we're going to build downtown over the next 10 or 20 years. And when we look at our burgeoning school populations, the question is, where are those families moving into? They're not moving into new developments because we haven't had any. We've built only, over the last 10 or so years, we've built maybe 10 or maybe 15 new housing units a year, which is pretty small. So all of those kids have moved into existing housing. So when we think about school capacity and where those families are coming into, they're already moving into existing housing stock. And when we think about who's going to be moving into our downtown, we think about people who are wondering about transit oriented, the fact that the number of cars you can have downtown is 0.75 per unit. You're going to have people who are probably not going to have large families because they're not going to have the cars to drive them to soccer practice. They're going to be moving elsewhere. So I think we have to be take a hard look at what the demographics are of where people are moving into, and but the key thing is we've got the density already, so we're not going to increase the number of units. So I will stop because other people have questions.
Yes, I wanted to say we've got about 9 minutes before your continued public hearing. So Lance, you haven't spoken yet. I want to recognize you, and then Wenji will come back to you.
Okay, two comments. One is the anxiety about Wedgemere development. That's been looked at about 20 times in the last 20 years. The MBTA owns the station itself and the trackage, obviously, but almost all the rest of the station area, except for a few square yards of the parking lot, it's all owned by DCR. It's all old MDC parklands, as is Ginn Field. Ginn Field is all owned, it's leased by the town for use in the spaces, but it's owned as parkland. And to make it a little more complicated, it's floodplain. It's underwater. If those of you remember some time back. So we've looked at development there a dozen times, and it's just not going to work you'd have to change parkland into development land, which is almost an impossible task. The other question, I guess, to Emily and to Diab, is it my understanding that the parcels that are excluded from this overlay district would still be governed by the CBD zoning? So, for example, if you excluded areas in the commercial areas and you wanted to, I think, very critically maintain ground level commercial space with housing above or office above, that would still be in place, but they would have to be excluded.
Yes, everything.
Okay.
All of the existing uses would follow the existing zoning. So it's only if you were to use the overlay, the multifamily overlay, then we would start talking about different. But yeah, they follow existing zoning.
So anything that's excluded for mixed use development or for historic purposes would stand under the existing zoning.
Right.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep. Jamie.
Yeah, real quick, I think related on the map. So buildings that the planning board deems worthy of commercial on the first floor are excluded. And are those the gray buildings on the map? Some of the buildings are brown and some are gray.
I'm going to pull them up so you can see them.
I believe that you're correct, Jamie. I think that the gray ones, everything that
this one here
isn't highlighted with a special color. So yeah, so for instance, could you zoom in, Emily?
Yeah, let me see if this will behave itself. There we go. These.
So if you can recognize the Brown and Stanton building, you'll see that's
yes.
Those are excluded. So essentially what we did is we looked at where the main Thompson Street is excluded. Those are the main commercial corridors. So those are excluded. You'll see the town commons is included, but because it's public land, we use that as contiguous. But yeah, the buildings are excluded.
I have a question about Church Street because it seems like that's also a commercial corridor, where La Patisserie and across the street, there's clothing stores and banks and yeah, it's commercial. Like, how do you decide which commercials are worthy of?
That is a great question. And these are just the ones that, we try to maintain a contiguous. One of the things you have to worry about is contiguity. So if you want to save things on Church Street, you essentially have to take out all of Church Street. And so that reduces your area. So those are questions you have to ask is if we put them in here and we take them out there, we have enough extra area to do some moving around. So there is, if we were to consider this plan as our base plan, then there is room to move things in and out depending upon how, what the values we want to put in. But the contiguity thing is really important. You have to keep
right. But when I look at this map, like I see the little buildings on Church Street that right now are commercial with living above, which is perfect. And then the brown doesn't include that condo building that is right across from like the hardware store and the grocery store, that L-shaped.
Yep, that is supposed to be in there. That was one of those corrections that has to be made.
Because that might change the math so you can save a few more commercial. Exactly. It's really, really hard when this is going into our only commercial center. But yeah, okay, thank you so much.
So I just want to check with 4 minutes left. Anybody have any further questions? And if not, just checking. I'm just going to, again, skim forward to Michelle, you had a question.
I'm sorry, just when you can put the map up again. I guess I could drive and try to figure it out myself, but where does it end? So I see it says like Waterfield, there's the little T, like if you go down, all the way down, not the teal section, if you're in district, yes, there.
In here? There you go.
Yeah, maybe zooming in, that's helpful. So Like, where's Bank of America and where's La Patisserie? Like, that might help us.
Dave, correct me if I'm wrong, but there are Church Street parcels that have been excluded that are not reflected in this map, correct?
Yes, that is correct. There are some that were taken out. And again, this is where, there is room to go one way or the other on this. And this is, again, just the first preliminary map. So, well, it's not the first because we've had several scenarios, but yeah, that we have room for maneuver here, which is really remarkable. It's not many communities can say that.
That is true. Yes.
But yeah.
So when we look at that, can you just tell me where it ends? Does it sort of end where the commercial stores end? Like, is that
pretty much? Yeah, pretty
I would
much.
wait for the final version of the map, Michelle, because that area changed fairly significantly, and most of those stores that we're picturing that sort of create that character of Church Street, where it's sort of the close commercial area, are preserved in the most recent version.
Thank you.
So thank you all. I just wanted to remind you the November 2nd meeting. Hope you can join. I think we'll be sending out some more information about how to join that to everybody soon if it hasn't already gone out from the town. Hope you can be there. Hope you tell your friends and colleagues about that. And then November 21st, we'll be there in person. Again, to discuss the options for both North Main Street and 3A. So we wanted to introduce them to you all separately so we'd have the time to go in depth on both the North Main Street corridor and the possibilities for 3A and really get you up to speed on 3A because it's quite complex. So thank you for your questions today and thank you for your patience. I certainly look forward to seeing you at our next meeting and hopefully at the public meetings as well. So we'll talk soon, and obviously I'll coordinate the new map and the revised model on the new map with Diab and with Taylor and Sally and the rest of the planning board.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank
Thank
you
you.
very much, Emily.
And we'd love to see the copy of that new map as soon as possible.
Yep, we will try. I mean, we will.
I mean, I know it's not set.
We can.
I know it's not set in stone yet, but still, it's good to be working with the latest ones.
Yes,
so,
we are moving through the technical issues of actually getting that done. One thing I should note is that all of the documentation we've had is up on the planning board's website. You can find the technical report there and all the models, as well as all of the documents from the state, which describe the legislation, and there's example zoning. I also want to note that if you have any questions, please mail them to planningboard@winchester.us, and we will pass your questions on to Emily or Michael Wang or John Rufo, depending upon where they should go, or we will try to answer them. So please do so, and we are thank you very much for coming this evening, and for those who are watching on tape delay, thank you for watching on tape delay. And then I guess we have to open our hearing now.
All right.
So it's going to be a really short hearing, but we do have to open it again. So thank you again, Emily. We will move back to our normally scheduled activities. So can I get a motion to open a hearing on CBD 18 for the Civico Causeway development on the Waterfield lot?
So moved.
And is there a second?
Second.
Great. So we'll do the roll call. So I Ching.
Yes.
Sally.
Yes.
Nick.
Aye.
Carrie.
Aye.
Nice eye as well. So this is going to be a really short hearing, and Taylor will tell us why.
Okay, so I haven't talked in so long, just did a lot of listening. So last time we met, I believe, was 2 weeks ago for this project, and we heard the peer reviews. We heard from Toole and Weston and Sampson for the traffic study and for the sewer and water. The Developers have received the traffic study and they're still reviewing it. They were unable to complete the review for tonight, so they requested additional time to present their review for you until the next meeting. They are still working through some design considerations that have come up from the fire department that is still kind of has thrown a wrench into the design for them, but they should be prepared to reshare a updated design with us. I didn't get an exact date, but they did say soon. Believe that that is the update that we have for today.
Yeah.
Do we have a time for when our design review consultant can come?
So no, because once they submit to us the next iteration of the design, then we can move forward and bring Dennis on.
So I think what I gather from Taylor speaking with him, that Civico and Causeway wish to delay the design review until they have dealt with the redesign because of the fire department's concerns. So
yep,
I think you just said that, Taylor, and I just repeated, so I apologize.
No, it's fine. It's totally fine.
We're kind of jumping.
We do have one last thing. We do have Ken Pruitt's comments in the packet. I don't know if it's worth going over it line item by line item or what if others have had the opportunity to read it beforehand. But it is here in the packet.
Do people want to discuss that, or Sally?
The only comment, I did read the report, and it doesn't seem like anything the planning board would need to discuss, and especially now that we're looking at some degree of a redesign. And I would hope that Ken would be able to take the time to give an equal level of scrutiny to the redesign. I have no idea what to expect.
Probably similarly with the Disability Access Commission's letter. So
that's right.
Yeah, my hope is that, well, I don't know what they will do to redesign it, but so I will not say anything. But
I think that's best.
Yeah, sorry, I keep wanting to say something, and I'm starting to stop myself. But yeah. So we have now had we've had input from. We need to put these up on our website. So
they are there.
They are there. Then that's already
everything's there. Yeah, we have all public. We have all public comment. We have all comment from boards and committees, and from other individuals up on the site. Everything is up to date.
Okay.
What we don't have on the site yet is the peer review documents for the stormwater, sewer, and water main, and the peer review document for traffic.
So we don't have the stormwater yet. We don't even have that.
Right.
We can. Do you want the peer review from Tool to be uploaded without the plan for Civico to address?
Yeah, what their responses are. Good question.
I think it's a public document, so it should go up.
Okay.
And we'll just.
All right. I'll put it up in the morning.
Yep.
Perhaps with a note that the process calls for Civico to submit their response when they're able. Just so people don't think that it just goes nowhere.
So are there any other comments or concerns from the board?
I guess one question I would have is what were the fire department's newly raised concerns?
I guess, question for me. So there are three main concerns. One is the, let's call it a driveway, how you get into the building and goes down the length of the road in between the structure and the train station. That is over 150 feet long, which means by fire code, it needs a turnaround at the end for fire, so for a fire truck. That, and currently there is no turnaround. It's just a dead end. Turnarounds can either be circles, cul-de-sacs, or hammerheads, which is like a T. Those are the two most common ones, and they take up a lot of space. So that's the first design consideration that needs to be thought of. The second is the width of the alley in between the development and the existing structures on Waterfield. Whether a truck can get through there, and whether a truck. This is actually something that's new to me. Before this, I didn't know that it's not just whether or not a truck can get through there, but it's whether or not sufficient access can get through if it's blocked. And you have to always assume that it's going to be blocked. What if there's a box truck being unloaded at the time of a fire or an emergency? What if there's an improperly placed trash can that blocks access? You have to assume that that's going to happen. So the fire department is requesting a wider means of access than already exists there. That's the second one. And the third one is access from Church Street. Currently, the developer came to us saying that they wanted to get egress from, or a right of way through the driveways of one of the, I think it was 38 Church, but that is not a legitimate means of access to a building. They cannot claim that as a means, so they need to consider a different way to access the building from Church Street.
You're talking about vehicular access?
No, just foot.
Pedestrian, okay, yeah, because that came up already. Yeah, okay.
No, this is access by the firefighters.
By fire. So if they need to bring a hose from Church Street down to the back of the building, they need to be ensured that they have access. And just having a written agreement from the owner of 38 Church, that's not a reasonable guarantee of access.
Wow.
That one's admittedly a little bit less of a guideline, design consideration, more of like a political thing, but yeah, or real estate law thing.
Right.
But
it's a real estate thing. Okay, thank you. I'm really grateful for that.
Okay, so if there are no other issues, not a lot to talk about on Waterfield at the moment, I don't think. So we would need to reschedule or schedule our next hearing on this. And so why don't we do our standard, let's schedule a time for our next meeting.
So doesn't it depend on when we have reports back on the peer reviews and the new design?
So yes, but unfortunately, we do have to actually schedule it now because we have to continue the hearing to a time certain.
Oh, a time certain, of course.
So that's the problem, is we can't simply say we will continue it when we get enough information. So that's why we've been having these continued hearings every time we meet in the hope that something happens. And if it doesn't, then we just.
So what the next planning board meeting is on?
Well, actually,
November 14th or November 2nd?
Well, the next evening, the next Tuesday planning meeting is, I believe,
November 14th.
It's the 14th.
The 14th, and so Why don't we?
So shall I move to continue the hearing for Waterfield CBD permit number 18 to a particular time on the day of Tuesday the 14th, that time being at 7 o'clock or 7.
No. We don't start till 7:15, Sally. So
Okay,
don't make us.
7:15. Okay.
Well, but
Let's
Well,
go
it's
to
7:30.
7:30.
7:30. Correct. Thank you.
Okay. So the
Nick.
motion is to continue this hearing until November 14th at 7:30. Is there a second?
Second.
Excellent. Let's do a roll call vote. Nick,
Aye.
Terry,
Aye.
Sally,
Aye.
I Ching,
Aye.
and I say aye as well. Thank you very much. So we are a little bit out of order, but that's okay. So the next thing is planning board updates. And we have we've got one update that on 20 Glenwood.
Okay, good.
And then we have to have a discussion about 40 Church very quickly, because we'll need to schedule a meeting to talk about it. And any other updates?
I was going to ask if we have a date for presenting the 3A project in North Main Street to the select board.
It keeps moving, but I think
November 27th.
November 27th.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. And then how's the banner?
I don't know.
Banner's not going to be ready for town meeting, unfortunately, but
Okay.
we will move. We will keep trucking along. I have a meeting with Reagan tomorrow.
Okay. And I was really curious to know if we got any resumes from Northeastern.
Unfortunately not. A little disappointed. I don't know how I have a call with someone at one of the schools later this week to hopefully open it up to more students or find out why it's not. Is it the way that the job description is written? Is it because of what I had actually wondered beforehand and I didn't actually bring it up, was it being in person? Is that an issue?
Oh.
For students who may not be able to, are we limiting ourselves by requiring it to be in person? It's not all students have a car. So I hope to have more information for you when we meet Friday morning, and happy to share more information to the rest of the board at the same time.
And I just had one more question. Is the event on the 21st at the Jenks, it's in person, is it also going to be recorded by WinCam for later play, but also will it be a live WinCam?
I don't know if it will be live. I know that we're setting it up with, I'm working on setting it up. And it will be set up a week before. So we'll
you have
try to make sure that we know what's going on. But
thank you.
I don't know if it will be live. I actually didn't ask that question. So
it's going to be very complicated, but they've done it many times. I Ching has been involved in events or presentations that.
I know it won't be on Zoom. I know that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. That's all I had.
I don't know.
Just questions.
Okay. So let me quickly bring you up to date on 20 Glenwood. 20 Glenwood is a very small property which the town acquired through non-payment of taxes, I guess is the best way of putting it. It was the town put together an RFP to try to sell the land for affordable housing purposes or best uses. That was done a couple of years ago. The RFP was written. They issued the RFP this summer. They got a single response to the RFP by one of the neighbors who wants to purchase it for $40,000. The select board has moved ahead with apparently with issuing a purchase and sales agreement. However, one of the conditions of the RFP was that the planning board be part of the review process for the responses to the RFP, and that has not happened. So the planning board, neither Taylor and myself were notified of the response, nor were we asked. I just requested it. I had to request it from the town manager's office because we weren't sent it. So there is a process issue. There's been some debate. The select board voted, there seemed to want to go ahead with selling this to the neighbor. The Affordable Housing Trust has said that they are willing to purchase this land to keep pursuing the idea of putting in an affordable unit on that land. That was the big push. That was one of the I wouldn't call it a promise, but certainly the impression that was given to town meeting that we wanted to do something with an affordable unit on this lot. Again, it's like a 2,800 square foot lot. It's very tiny. So there was a discussion at the select board meeting last Monday, and the select board, there were some legal concerns raised as to whether the town could back out of this purchase and sales. There was concerns about whether this property it's a non-conforming lot, but enough time has elapsed. It hasn't been used as housing that, for instance, 355 or in our zoning bylaw would not apply. So this would have to be redeveloped under current zoning for RG6. And that probably, you can't build a house there under that, or it could be done through a local initiative project, a friendly 40B, similar to what was happening over on Cross Street. So the select board decided last Monday that they would get a new appraisal for the lot. There are concerns about whether the appraisal is valid, seeing as when the RFP was sent out, it wasn't noted in the RFP that the lot was no longer buildable. One of the concerns about the valuation is that this is a 2,800 square foot lot, which is right next to a 10,000 some square foot lot, which is a single family lot. But in RG6, if you get more than 11,000, you could put a duplex on there. So if at some point this lot was to be sold to the person who owns the 10,000 square foot lot, all of a sudden you have a lot big enough to put a duplex, and that is a considerable more, that raises the value of this little piece of land a lot, because all of a sudden you can leverage it to put in more building on the next lot. So I think the question of appraisal is something that's complex. So the question is, where does the planning board fit into this? I am going to write a letter to the select board, and I'm going to express the fact that that the RFP process has not been followed, and that we have not been part of that decision-making process, or at least the review process. The select board, of course, has the right to make that decision. It's town land, but the RFP requires that we be part of the discussion, and that hasn't happened. So I'm going to send that out, and then we'll see where it goes from there. And that's 20 Glenwood. I Ching, you're very familiar with this. Did I leave anything important out?
Well, the Affordable Housing Trust sent a letter to the select board, I think today, saying that they are still very much wanting to take that land and take ownership of it and make it affordable housing pursuit of it. And, we did a little bit of, with all the setbacks and things, you can build on it a footprint about 20 by 40. And with 2.5 stories, it could be, a 2-unit, 1 or 2 bedroom kind of space. But of course, it's highly expensive, and we'll see how it goes.
Okay. The next. Oh, sorry, Taylor. I just got your text from 2 hours ago.
Just in time.
Just in time, yeah. So the other thing that we need to discuss is scheduling for discussion of 40 Church Street. So 40 Church Street came before us a few weeks ago, and we looked, and they came in looking for waivers for particular parts from the design review process in the CBD. We okayed a few of them. We asked for more documentation. Taylor has looked at that, and the decision is that they have met the requirements to submit for a complete application. So we've had a historical commission review of this project. Unfortunately, design review has not been able to schedule that review, so we're currently at a point where this project has been essentially before the town since May in some capacity or another, and so we can't. The question is, what are the options going forward in terms of, is there parts of this project which could proceed without design review, and are there parts that do not require design review and they could proceed? Or do we, so these are things we can't discuss tonight because it's not on our agenda. But I think that in fairness to the proponents who've been trying to get this through since May, that we should try to talk about this as soon as we can. So we do have time. Our next actual planning board meeting is on November 6th at 6 p.m. before town meeting. So there is an opportunity to discuss it then. There is one article, I think, in the warrant article, in the warrant, that we should discuss as a planning board in terms of whether we wish to endorse it or not, and that is the town purchasing a piece of land on the Waterfield lot from the MBTA so that there is complete control of that property.
Right.
So Taylor, did I miss anything on that?
No, thank you for saying it the way that you did. You did it much more calmly than I would. I just want to express the, you know, we've held up this project for a long time for numerous reasons. The packet that they have submitted and we do have in front of us is complete. Historical liked what they saw. We're just unable to get design review to review it for one reason or another. Yes, that would be what I will say about it.
So logistically, if we want to discuss it before town meeting on November 6th, we have a 1-hour meeting, right? And we would talk about several things, probably, I don't know. But the packet for that meeting would come to us on, I don't have the calendar.
We can distribute the application, the complete application for 40 Church now.
That would be great.
We have it in hand, so let's get that out.
I definitely need to understand the project more than I do.
Right. So the particulars I think that we should think about in discussion is, so again, what the planning board in the design review process in the CBD is for the external parts of the project. So the question is, are there external parts of this project which can proceed without design review? And so there are two key components. One is the replacement of the siding and the windows with I think the term is in kind.
Right.
And that is, I believe, the historical commission has weighed in on that. And the other part is the building of a new story behind the mansard roof. So are those two components, if, for your consideration, is if the residing and replacement of the windows are done in a historically accurate and compassionate way, is that separable from the construction of the story behind the mansard, so that so as you may or may not have seen this building, it is in a state of disrepair. There are eaves which are open. The windows are leaking. There is, while one could, and obviously they have, weatherproofed it to some extent. There is the question is, can those two components be separated? And that's for this board to discuss when we next meet. And again, we can't discuss that tonight, but that would be
very helpful briefing, Diab.
yeah,
Thank you.
And again, if when you get the packet and you don't understand what's going on, please contact Taylor. He will be able to give you a clue as to what's going where, what the materials are, and things like that.
Excellent.
So if that's okay with the board, why don't we schedule it for the 6th?
Yep.
And we'll do that early on. I don't think we'll have a lot to talk about that evening. Okay. So
you mentioned the one warrant article that we have a requirement to vote on, which is the Article 11, the 4/100ths of an acre at Waterfield. Are there other ones that we're supposed to, or that we are welcome to comment on?
So, I just realized that this might actually not be something we can do. So we're not required to vote on it, but I just realized that we are the special permit granting authority for this project. And if we endorse an article going to town meeting, which is in favor of this project, that might actually be a conflict of interest.
You're talking about
the article in
Waterfield.
The Waterfield. And so maybe we need to, in my mind, that could be a conflict of interest.
Well, maybe our town council can tell us.
So let's talk to our town council, and we can put that on our November 6th meeting, and we could hopefully, let you know before then what town council says about our ability to vote on that.
Okay, that's great. So then I had the question of whether we have jurisdiction or even wish to lend our support for any of the other articles in the warrant.
Well, that's actually unfortunately not on our agenda tonight, but I think we can.
So maybe we can talk about that.
I think we can slide that into the town report later on. But I do think we do have to get back to our agenda. We have meeting minutes.
It's almost 9:15.
And it's almost 9:15. So I think we could probably dispose of I don't mean dispose. We can deal with the other articles on Monday the 6th, because I don't think there are that many.
Yeah.
So why don't we get to the meeting minutes for October 3rd?
Oh yeah, that's right. I did that.
They're not in this packet.
No.
Oh, that's odd.
October 3rd and October 10th, right?
We just have the two of them. Is there a revised packet?
I don't think so. Is this the packet that everyone else got?
Yeah, I got the
The packet that Suzanne Gill sent out has them.
I can share it.
Okay, thank you.
You see that?
It's still black. No screen.
Oh, wrong screen. Sorry. All right, somebody has to share. Sorry. Somebody else, sorry.
Where I get the right packet.
I'm not sure I can open it on this computer.
The one that she shared on Monday, yesterday. I opened up that Dropbox link and it's that one I just had. Okay, we can see it.
Is Dia frozen?
Oh, is this him sharing, or is it?
Oh,
No,
that's
this
me.
is Carrie.
Dia's gone.
So yes.
Hold on, I'm trying to get my screen back to the same.
I have nothing for October 3rd.
I had for October 3rd, I had just on the first page 3 little edits. In item 1 information session, on the 4th line down, it says the goal, or the 3rd line down, the goal for the zoning revisions is spring 2024, and I wanted to insert the words town meeting after the 2024. I wanted to mention at the end of the Mr. Herman paragraph that it probably should say Michael Wang and John Rufo. They were both in attendance. And they both work on this project. And then under Miss Innes, the paragraph that begins, she identified 6 tasks. On the 3rd line, it reads, she then explained that and I wanted to say MBTA Communities Act, because it is referred to it as that.
Good clarifications.
And then I also was curious about the 6 tasks, but I think we can find that in her presentation, so I can look for that. So that's all I had on the minutes of October 3rd.
Ian's back.
Can we vote with can we
Yeah,
vote?
should we move to
Oh, there
approve
we go.
Oh, there he is.
Now I'm back. So I lost connectivity, so I'm not quite sure. But I guess everyone discussed their alterations.
I made 3 minor edits, just clarification edits for the October 3rd minutes, and I'm happy to go through them for you, Dia, if you wish.
No, if the rest of the board is okay with them, I'm fine with them as well.
I move that we approve the meeting minutes for October 3rd with the edits.
And is there a second?
I'll second.
Excellent. All in favor? Nick,
Aye.
Yi Ching,
Aye.
Carrie,
Aye.
Sally,
I
and I say aye as well. Thank you much. Would you be so kind as to send those off to Nancy, please?
will indeed.
Thank you. And then we're off to the next one, which is on
The 10th.
the 10th. Any comments or
Yeah,
corrections on the 10th?
And I have one edit.
Go ahead, please.
On the top of page 2, where it says Mr. Herman, the second sentence, it says the developer nor the engineering department have reviewed. And I think it needs to say neither the developer nor the engineering department have reviewed.
Okay.
And that's all I have. These are great minutes.
Okay. Any other comments or corrections? None? Then I would welcome a motion to approve these minutes for, what was the date again, please?
October 10th.
10th.
For October 10th. Is there such a motion?
So moved.
And is there a second?
A second.
Okay, roll call vote, please. Nick,
Aye.
Yi Ching,
Aye.
Carrie,
Aye.
Sally,
Aye.
and I say aye as well. Thank you much. Now let us move on to the town meeting report. So I apologize for getting it out so late, but let us, I'm going to try to find it and share it. We'll see how well that goes. Last time I tried this, I lost connectivity. can't find it. Ah. Okay.
I have it if you want me to share it.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead? I'm sorry. I did actually
The
just
PowerPoint.
I would why don't we just do the PDF and then I'll edit it, because the PowerPoint that's a conversion from a program which isn't PowerPoint, so just the PDF. So there are a couple of things that I have I've got more information so I can fill in some of the question marks on there. But I wanted to I haven't timed this, and first off, I'd like to know, are there obviously I'm not using our latest graphics that will come in, but other than that, let's go through. Why don't we just do open season on this? You want to start at the beginning and go through, or are there parts? Is there overall some part which I think is incomplete, or something?
I sent comments to Taylor. I don't know if you got them.
You send them to me or to Taylor?
To Taylor.
Okay.
Yeah, I got them.
Okay. So I don't know that I want to go through them, but I Ching, you started.
Oh,
Yeah, go.
I just want to, Taylor, can you put up the version which has notes, the dash notes.pdf version?
So I'll start my comments. I think that one of the things about the planning board presentations that I've noticed at town meetings is that they always run over. And I do not, I am concerned that we are bearing the lead on the most major piece that I think we need to introduce, which is MBTA 3A. I do think that that needs to get the bulk of the time, at least half of the time that are allotted, if not more. And I worry about the first part, especially when we go over all the housing units developments that's been happening. First of all, I think that most people cannot associate the address with the project. So visually, I think if you are to go through each and every individual project, that it is very hard for people to understand what is going on, and it just becomes this massive numbers, and it becomes dry, and I think we lose interest. But I think if possible, with Taylor's help, or I can help too, if this could be a boom, 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 and with images of what these projects are about, and one last, major Excel sheet of the the details of how these projects are adding to the SHI or market and affordable units, that would do. But I think that just going through these parts, and I've done these presentations before too in front of people, where it does get really bulky, and it's too much information. And I do not want people to lose interest before we get to MBTA 3A. So I wonder if that could be even shifted down so that it improves on its graphics, and so that people understand what project you're talking about. 654 Main Street, it's Fells Hardware, right? The image is very clear in people's mind what that is. That moves down, and MBTA gets shifted up a lot more. Or just get central to it, because I feel like there's a lot of lead up to it, and it ends with that, and that can't be. It's too central to what we need to do for Springtown meeting.
Okay.
I think that makes sense.
I agree with that, because it's going to take a couple of rounds for people to digest the 3A stuff, and it's on the heels of here comes a flood of units that are in a intimidating graph, it'll turn them off. And I love the image idea. I think people see the addresses and lose the details trying to remember where this place is. But if they just see like picture, it's much easier to grab the context.
Yeah, and even a map.
Yeah.
Okay, so I will need help with that.
I can help you.
So The key thing, the important things that I've discovered on this is that there's really no change on 735 or 654. There are no permits that have come in, so nothing's happened on that. 416 Cambridge Street, apparently they're not even close to getting their permits.
I'm
1930
sorry, across from Whole Foods. Okay.
across
They're
from
not
Whole
close to-
Foods.
When you say they're not close to getting their permits at 416, they're getting certificates of occupancy.
I'm sorry, they're not getting their certificates of occupancy.
Right.
Those apparently are delayed.
Oh, okay.
So River Street is actually in the process of getting their COs. They're coming in, it's very slow. So it's possible they might get all their COs by the end of the year. But
I think town meeting will want to know that.
yeah, so I do recognize this is too much, but unfortunately,
Did I hear I Ching say that she would help you with this?
Yeah, I think it's important information, but I think when we go through each of them like that, people really do lose it. Lose where
I
we're at.
completely agree. I completely
It
agree.
loses the major information is that where there are projects coming on. Most are,
So
at whatever the main points of this is.
So I think that highlighting the fact that 1935 River Street is getting COs, that 8789 Cross Street was approved, and the Waterfield lot is, those three things which are highlighted in yellow are really the only three things which have changed since spring.
Yes, and keep it simple. That's really good.
So that, if we're not going to do the reveal, which I agree, then I think we should throw out everything on this slide except for those three projects.
Okay, we can work on this together. Yeah.
Because the only reason for the reveals was so that people don't see this ginormous matrix and get completely psyched out.
In fact, they don't need to. So
So the only three things are the ones in yellow. So that's great. We can cut all this out. So that's done. So let's move on to, there is a table of contents I put in. There's an agenda at the top. So why don't we scroll up to the, no, not that one right there. Okay. So, the question is, so we have a couple of short ones. The ADU and light industrial are pretty short. Do we want to put that at the end or at the beginning?
I think the end.
Okay. SHI and housing production plan, that's really just an update. So at the end,
go down to the end too.
Yeah, and one note about that too is that the housing production plan is owned by the select board, and I wonder if we could just let them do that update.
It's really signed off by both of us. So it's a weird thing. So it may be owned by the select board, but it has to be signed off by the planning board. So
it's a joint project.
It's a joint project. And we are going to be I think a critical part of that, because if you look at the last housing production plan, I think 80% of it fell onto the planning department.
So maybe you could say joint project on that slide, or agenda. Never mind. Yeah.
So no, let's go down to what I have on it, and let's just see if that's sufficient or is too much. So, but let's move that to the end.
Which achieves I Ching's excellent recommendation that we not bury the lead on 3A.
Yep. So I've got two slides on the housing production plan, which is just a quote on what it's supposed to do. And then the next slide is just schedule. And that was it.
You should say who's working on it, because there's a team, right?
Yeah, that would be in the text. I would say something about
there's town manager, select board.
There's town manager, there's a consultant. And there's, right now, I don't know that there's an actual group that's come together. I don't think there's an actual working group.
Well,
there's not.
I'm sorry, what?
There's not the group, the working group has not been selected yet. You're muted.
All we've got now is we have a consultant at the MAPC who has come up with a scope of work, I believe, and that's pretty much it.
You're muted, Sally.
Well, it just sounds like either the planning board or the select board um, would want to collaborate on appointing the working group and get working, because
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't know how long it takes to do these things, but
So
a long time.
It takes a long
okay,
time.
well then we
Yes.
should get working.
Yes.
I know
For
John
just
Spears
just,
anyway.
just so that you know, I'm the only staff member on the HPP. So it's just gonna take a long time to do things.
So by
Well,
what
this-
process shall we prompt the formation of the working group?
So if I might suggest that we have this discussion in full at another meeting, just so that we can tear apart the rest of this report. I think it's a very valid point, Sally. And that's something that we have not really considered. So shall I combine these two slides? I just want to say something about this because it does fall under planning board's purview at some level.
Sure. I think the fewer slides the better, but
Yeah.
there is a lot of text here. I just don't know how much people read these texts, but if you accompany it by your verbal.
Maybe just a picture of the last edition of the housing production plan and
That's
saying
right.
it's got to be updated by this date. It's
Yeah, in some ways,
we're forming a group.
That's
I
more
don't think-
effective in some ways.
But nobody knows what a housing. Okay, so there's
Yeah,
there
it's
are-
in your comment.
yeah. So I see two parts of this. One is okay. So the idea would be to replace this with a picture and just talk to it. I mean,
Yeah, possibly. I just think that very few people read this much text on a slide.
Especially when you're talking. If you're talking and reading, if the speaker is talking different words than what's on the screen, and you're reading what's on the screen, then you're seeing one or hearing the other. And if he's just reading what's on the screen, it's
so
not as
this
interesting.
is the shortest thing I could pull out of what the state claims it is. So I can turn these into bullets with fewer words.
Bullets is good.
Yeah.
I don't, to be honest, the fact that 3 sentences is too much for people to read is a little, I'm not sure I agree with that comment, but I can certainly make this more punchy. There really are only 3 sentences here, so, but I can make it punchy. We can put in a copy of the front of the report, which is as boring as all get out because it really, it's pretty boring.
Yeah.
So the inside is much more exciting than the outside. But let's turn this into a single slide and keep this down to a minute.
Great.
So let's do that. So we've dealt with, so then we have light industrial. Let's get rid of that one and then we can go back and zoom in on 3A. So I believe light industrial was a single slide. What happened to it? It just disappeared.
Here it is. Holton Swanton Cross.
So
A
this
better
is,
image would be great.
I'm sorry.
A better image would be good.
I don't know. What do you mean? I'm not being combative. I just don't know what you mean by
Yeah,
a better image.
I know. I think we should dig into some of the slides to get a more meaningful image there, so that people can focus.
Use the one
So I
that
don't think that people-
I put on the website.
This one is? Okay. I
You
just don't
can, you
think that
can
people
use it. It's
orient
better.
themselves.
Well, I think there's lots of good images in the report, and I Ching's right. And to me, the most important thing is that because of the urgency of MBTA 3A, and its overlap with rezoning the vitality of the North Main Street corridor, our bandwidth doesn't, and it's because of the delayed hire. Yeah, that's an important point. And
Yeah,
then
I mean,
forming a working group.
these are the 3 points.
Yeah, that's it.
I think that's more confusing, to be honest. there's too much going on in this slide.
Well, actually,
But-
what it says, and I wouldn't include the entire screenshot, but you could take the white box and you can sort of fade it off at the bottom so they understand this is coming from the town website. Go get it, look at it. You could even put the URL at the top, but say there's a lot of information about this, and we're forming a working group, and this is where we're at.
Right. So we're just talking about the image here. So if you go back to the slide. So the URL and the QR code are in. Is there another bullet point I should make?
No, these are the points. I was just
Okay.
saying each thing's comment about the image.
Yeah. So let's get another graphic. Like I said, I'm kind of rushing right now because I think we need to get to the MBT 3A part.
Yes, we do. Good.
Yeah.
And we have 20 minutes left at that. So better graphic on this. And I think the ADU is, I don't know what to do. It's a single sentence. Do we actually need to bring it up?
Maybe not.
I
Okay.
think not.
Yeah, it's just one sentence because that's all we got to say about it.
Well, more about it in talking to Kathy Boyle, our disability advocate. She was saying, the point of this was never about volume. The point of this is that it made it legal so that people who needed this could now start getting that process underway. So we did that job, in that maybe we don't have the volume to show for it, but people who need it can start the process now.
Yeah. So that could be, that could be not a throwaway line, but if there's time, throw it at the end.
Yeah, I don't mind it because I think that's sort of like we're done. Like, the sort of like last step is it's up and working. And if it's the first one's in construction, then like all the effort that went into that was successful and we don't have to bring it up again.
Maybe that's the happy news you can deliver at the very end of your remarks.
Yeah, I agree. Upbeat at the end if there's time, and it's okay if you don't get to it.
Great.
Okay.
Okay.
Then let us move on to slide number. Is that the first one? Yeah. Okay. So we're at 3A. What is it that we want to talk about?
Well, to try to explain it to town meeting is impossible. So what you would want to talk about is that the ZRAC has been formed. You can even put a slide up with the names, and you can put a slide up with their charge. And to say that they'll be working with us, with the planning board, and we're working with our consultants to come up with MBTA 3A, multifamily housing by right zoning in specific parts of town to be in compliance with state law. And that in some ways intersects with something that came out of the master plan, which is the revitalization of the corridor and the ZRAC. And we're going to be writing new design standards and zoning dimensional requirements for the redevelopment of the North Main Street. And the ZRAC's going to help us with that. And that's what's happening.
Okay. So I think that's all covered pretty much on this slide. And then the next slide talks about the ZRAC. So
I wonder if the main points might be that this is a law, kind of like what Emily said today, right? This is a state law, new state law. There needs to be compliance. It's not optional. The purpose of it is to build multifamily. It's one of many tools, but it's not optional. What are the consequences? I think we really need to talk about the consequences right off the bat. And I don't know if Taylor and Beth have gotten that number yet, but like how much money are we talking about being foregoing, right?
I don't think we're going to get that by then.
No, but we can still make the point.
But those main points that it's a law, compliance is not really an option, or not complying is an option, I suppose, but like for the best case, possibly, we need to comply. And then the rule, how much it might cost us, and then the rules of this law.
So Taylor, I'm going to share my screen, if that's okay. So a lot of okay, so can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, so I had this dilemma. So a lot of this is what was in Springs. So I had a lot more, I had more than this in last falls. So I can bring back some of this content in terms of compliance down here at the bottom. You know, is this more, you know, is this slide more in along the lines?
I do think so. I think that that needs to, like Carrie said, has to be reiterated multiple times because I don't think that folks
Okay.
are getting it.
Okay, that's let me go back to
Can you get Emily's graphics, like her gear?
I know.
Like,
Yeah, her graphics were great.
Taylor
the
and I had
graphics
talked
are
about Emily
complicated.
creating handouts for the town meeting front table.
So my concern with Emily's graphics is that they're great if you can spend the time to explain them. We have maybe 5 minutes if we want to. I mean, originally we had like 3 minutes set aside for this, but let's make it 5. So one of these is actually the correct one.
But you're thinking of adding graphics in addition to your text. And I mean, take your text and digest it as a graphic. So people have something to, you know.
So this is what I presented last fall. So this went into a lot more detail. This was a much longer presentation. I mean, I could give this again.
No, I do think that Carrie's point, I think that Emily's graphics went through some of those points. And
yes, but Emily, but again, are Emily's graphics going to be able to be explained inside of 5 minutes?
I think easier than the text, actually.
Okay.
A picture's worth 1,000 words, Diab. You're saying 1,000 fewer words.
I don't agree that a picture is worth 1,000 words. I think
No, I know, but I think if people have, you're addressing a room full of people who grab information differently. And I think when people are trying to read quickly and digest information and hearing it read to them, they get nervous and it's not an effective communication tool for everyone. You want to hit as many people as possible. The biggest take home is really to come to public meetings because they're going to get questions from their constituents and they need to vote.
so. Which of the graphics that Emily has put up are ones that you think, you know, we have 5 minutes, you have 5 slides max. So
yes.
Which of those?
We don't have them in front of us, but I think some of the ones that stayed in my mind were the middle housing graphic of what that density looked like. I think that was key.
Yep.
Another one was some of the tools, like when she looked at some of the tools because I do think that people think about this as affordability and whether or not it's so the market kind of the tools used, and MBTA 3 is one of those tools. It made it less intimidating. Yes. I think. Those are 2 that stood out for me.
Zoning, and there were 3 things that had to work together. So the ZRAC will help decide how to get those things to square, and they'll advise the planning board. Like I think
I like that one too.
Okay. I will admit the reason I'm pausing here is because I'm going to need an awful lot of help to get this done, because I just that's just in, And
If you can shoot her an email that just asks for the middle housing graphic, the slide rule, and the even just those two.
well, the middle housing graphic has been out for years, so that's easily, we can grab that
Yeah,
one.
but the way that she formatted it and how it looked on the screen was very helpful. And you don't have to reinvent her slides. I think those were actually made for our community. And the graphic were like what the requirements were, and was also very helpful.
Yeah,
And
so the ones I
it's-
remember have an awful lot of words on them. That's my problem. So the slide which said there are 4 different ways you can impact housing. And so there are a lot of words on those. And so that's the part that I'm trying to, you know,
There
you
was
know,
one
I don't
theme
have,
on that was just 4 slide rules, and it was, we have to get the law says we have to get here, we slide density, we slide whatever square footage, whatever it was, acreage, and it just sort of helps people understand that we're gonna, yeah, perfect. That's great. So all you have to do there is say, you could take some of that out. You could say, we have this, on the left, we're afraid of this on the right, and the reality of what we're going to build is in the middle.
yeah, I mean, okay. So this is a slide that, we've got it. It's been around for a while, but that's
Right,
not the slide rule I think you're talking about.
No, but this is one of those 2 key graphics.
But I don't think this helps people understand what we have to do to comply.
No, so we do the levers, right? The levers that she did, those 3 levels. And
Yes.
even just going through this recent presentation and verbatim of what she said, because she went through them really quickly and very clearly. And I think that's possible in this presentation as well. So this one, as well as the last part where she had the graphic that Wenji had corrected, where the numbers of 37 acres, blah 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 blah, like that number of units. That was very helpful too. Yeah.
And
Yeah,
then you follow up with, this is complicated, or if you're confused by this, we're going to be presenting it and these 2, one on Zoom, one live, and many more after that.
So I'm going to say that this is far too complicated a figure to show for a 1 minute per slide.
But I would argue that the slides that you were showing were way too.
I'm not arguing.
Yeah.
I completely agree with your, I agree.
I would say maybe not this one, but the map.
I'm just
think
trying
that
to.
was very helpful too. I think it lessened people's wariness also. It's at the end, Taylor, I think.
So the thing I'm worried about is that when you give people graphics, they spend a lot of time trying to orient themselves and understand what's going on. So, and so that's why I'm, showing a map. All of a sudden, everyone's going to be looking at this map and trying to figure out where it is in town.
Yeah.
And when you had people who are really conscious of being where it was, they couldn't figure out where Church Street was on here. So graphics are great, but I'm not sure these graphics are clean enough in order to do. That's my concern, is that you don't like text, that's fine, but the graphics that replace them have to be so simple that someone can understand them and not get spooked. So if I were to put up the sliders showing we can change density, we can say, what the heck do those units mean? I mean, what are those sliders?
That's what your words are, your verbal words
I
are.
don't know. I agree, but I don't know that I can convey that in 5 minutes. And that's my concern, is that if we're going to put up a slide which requires too much explanation, because it's so I think that, for instance, the gear with the zoning, where's the gear thing? That gear thing, I think, is easy to explain.
Okay. Great. So use that instead.
So I think that if we can say, but it doesn't, I think there's also a slide before then which talks about the 3 issues. So that one there, land area, capacity, zoning. This is really clear.
Yeah.
So but it doesn't have graphics on there. It's just,
That's great. No, but I think this is clearer
still a more
than the
graphic presentation than a bullet list.
Oh yeah, I agree. I'm not against graphics. I'm just, my concern is watching, I get to see all these people's eyes glaze over. So I'm very much aware of how much people are bored by my presentations. Um, the, but to replace them with something, within the limits of what is being, what we can produce in the next 2 weeks, right? So we don't have a graphics department, so I'm going to need a lot of help if
Okay.
people want to improve this, because I can do text, which boring
Yep.
as it may be. I'm just, that's my main concern is the bandwidth here. So if we can pull out, we need one introductory slide with text on it to explain something about MBTA. If we have 2 or 3 slides with a graphical presentation of the knobs you can tweak in order to get us compliance. And then another slide which talks about the process going forward. So it would be the ZRAC, the public hearings. And so I think that I Ching, you described the ZRAC perfectly, or someone did, it wasn't me. And if we could capture those words on a slide, I think that would be great. But if we're limiting ourselves to like 3 or 4 bullets per slide, then I'll have to explain a lot. And it's, but again, if
I think that space is okay in verbally and in graphics and visually. And the catch all is, here are the public meetings. This is where you go. I think that would be fine.
I Ching, do you have time in the next 2 weeks to work on the PowerPoint?
I'll make time for this. I think this is really important.
And Taylor, do you have PowerPoint skills?
PowerPoint skills or design skills?
these can be just static images. So
Static images. Doesn't have to be
Yeah,
PowerPoint, great.
yes, I can help with this.
Yeah, I mean it's so.
I do think one of the things about some of the other some of the more effective presentations at town meeting were maybe we're the punchier ones, and I do think that we need to make our presentations visually and just in presentation wise punchier to get people on the side of this.
I completely agree. And if someone, I am not the punchiest of speakers, nor am I very good at creating punchy. I'm more than willing to give up the presentation if someone wants to do it.
No, I'm happy to help with the visual part.
Oh, please take it. I'm happy to have someone else do the presentation.
Yeah, I want you to be comfortable, but I do think that this will speak to maybe a part of town meeting I feel like could use a little bit of urging here, because this is too important to kind of lose people.
I agree. I completely agree.
Deb, if you want me to present the slides, I can do that. And I do agree with I Ching's and Carrie's comments.
Yeah, I've just, I'll be honest, I am mentally exhausted. And the thought of going and doing this is just, it's not the first thing I wake up thinking of doing. So I will be honest. So
why don't I throw my hat in, and I Ching, it's great. Everything you said, all your comments are so valid, and I am totally available to work with you and with Carrie and with Taylor.
I mean,
if we want to work on it.
So this is a decision, I think, whichever way the board wants to go to make the best possible presentation to town meeting, I'm on board with that. I have no ego involved in this. I don't need to present it or anything like that. So it's I Ching, I understand where you're coming from, and whatever we can do.
Okay, I don't want to take it from you, Deb. I think that it is wonderful that you're up there and being
trying to give it
the leader that you are. No, you're great at leading and bring this forward. I'm just saying we could just
I'm
massage it a little bit.
Let's set up a time. Let's work on it. let's
I'll
see.
try to get it out fairly soon so that you have time to look at it and feel
Yeah,
comfortable.
so what I will do is, so, you know, I will reorder the slides as they are, strip out all of the things that we've decided. I think we can look back at this video and make up our mind as to, so we need something better for light industrial. We need to have images for the 2 or 3 projects which have any sort of changes since the spring. I mean, one of the things that we are supposed to do by law is report upon housing developments in town. So that's pretty much the only reason I put that in there.
No, that's great. That
so-
one, the final graphic is great. I mean, the chart is good. Somebody can take a photo of it and remember that and look at it later. But we just don't have to go through each item.
I agree. So we have some visual pop. I will strip out as much as possible from the other things. I really hate the look of the whole thing, but that's the you know, changing the colors to our new logo colors is something that could be done. So that's another thing that could be done on the side. I'm limited in the fact that I don't have PowerPoint. I have this thing that I use. So if we're going to share the document, the only other way of doing it would be use like Google, whatever the hell Google's product is called, which is even more limited, but at least it's something you can work on together. I don't know that we have access to something through Microsoft 365, which we have. I don't think Microsoft has a online shareable.
It does.
It does.
Yep. It can be done online.
And we all have access to that through our Office
You do.
365 accounts. What do you know? Let's investigate that.
The other thing, Diab, I want to point out is that I remember that last year or 2 years ago, Heather Von Mering, in her role as town moderator, published a communications advisory to all boards and committees. It's a written document that says what she likes to see.
Yeah,
so
and I
I
thought
can
that
find that and send it to the board.
I think it's, you know, I think that our presentations are fairly along those lines. The type is big, you know, making it visually. I mean, that's one of the things I worry about is making the type large enough so people can see it, especially myself. But those are, yeah. So, so why don't, I Ching, if you and I could meet sometime this weekend?
Okay. Yeah.
If that's possible. And we can discuss that. I think the board, my idea of the consensus of the board is that we're pushing the MBTA 3A as the big ticket. Everything else goes as sort of updates. I think that we've achieved some sort of a consensus on which I'm just trying to say that we know which way we're going. So if I Ching and I and Taylor step off to the side and put this through, that we're not going to be changing the direction of the content, so that we can continue to work on this. And then we will have a version out, hopefully sometime next week, that we can send around. If there are concerns from the board about that it's not in the direction, then we should raise it then. I'm trying to get us to the point where we don't have to have another meeting to approve this. That's all I'm trying to say, because otherwise,
well, if we do have to have another meeting, it can be a short meeting. It can
be a very short meeting.
40 minutes, 30 minutes.
I mean, the key is the town moderator wants to have board sign off. I don't know if this is at the stage where the board can say, yeah, we sign off on it. If you're
No, we
comfortable
have not.
with that. I don't think there's anything controversial in what we're presenting in terms of what the board expects out of the presentation. So if the board wants to just say, yeah, we sign off on the content now, it's up to you. If you're not comfortable doing that, then that's fine. We'll do it at a later date. This is just, town moderator wants board sign off on content. So.
Well,
we can
I can make a motion that I Ching and Diab and with working in conjunction with Taylor will come up with the next draft of the planning board report, and we will need to see it because town meeting starts.
On the
Look at the
6th.
calendar.
It's the 6th.
yeah, November 6th, and today's the 24th. So it would be really good to have something by Halloween, even though we're not meeting that night. But so whenever that early that week, because we have to use the week of the 30th to vote on the report. And whenever Heather needs it, we have to have that vote by then.
We can have that vote on the 6th.
Okay. Wow.
I mean,
Okay.
she just needs to know. I'm sure she would like it earlier, but I can contact her and let her know that, if we get a draft to you next week, and if there are no, issues raised with the content, if it's just a presentation issue, then that's something we can work on. But I think it's primarily the content. I mean, for those who aren't familiar with the reason for this, a couple of town meetings ago, one of the boards issued a endorsement and didn't note that that was actually a 3-2 vote by the board, not a unanimous vote. And so there was some consternation from the two who voted against it as to why wasn't they were not in approval, so they should have been brought up on the floor. And after that, I think Heather said, if you're going to make a statement on the floor, you do actually have to get the people to endorse it. So that's where that comes from, which seems completely reasonable. So, okay, so we'll get you a draft by sometime next week, early next week. It may not look the prettiest, but it should have the content, or at least it'll have words accompanying whatever graphics we put on there. And then hopefully, if we need to have a quick meeting at the end of next week to approve it, that would be better than doing it on the 6th, just so that we can get it to Heather. We'll need 48 hours, so we would probably want to schedule some sort of a short meeting prior to that. Just schedule it, and if we don't need it, that's fine. We don't have to do that this evening. We'll do that via Doodle or whatever tool. Okay, I think we've exhausted our time, and I don't have anything left to say. So if there was a motion to adjourn, we couldn't do so. Somebody want to move to adjourn?
Move to adjourn. I move to adjourn.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Excellent. Roll call vote. Nick.
Aye.
Yu Ching.
Aye.
Carrie.
Aye.
Sally.
Aye.
And I say aye as well. I want to thank everyone who joined us earlier, our ZRAC. Thanks to our recording secretary, Nancy Polcari. Thanks to WinCam as ever for joining us and recording us and sending us out on their YouTube channel. Thank you, Taylor Herman, town planner. Thanks, Alex Kavlakian, for sticking around this long. You have a lot of patience, I guess. Thanks to everyone out in TV land, and we will see you on this channel in a couple of weeks, but we will be in person before town meeting on November 6th, and at the high school. See you all later. Have a great evening.
Good night.